This is a much better room, I think, than committee room, whatever it is that we normally sit in. Thank you for coming this afternoon. You did ask us not to see Atos for various reasons, and we respected that decision. But I also have to say to you that if at the end of today we feel that we need more information and a better response, we will be calling them on another occasion. Good. Well, I'm going to start off questioning. Reading all this, it looks to me like you've got a complete monopoly provider of these services. How, in that context, can you possibly assure us that you're getting either value for money or effectiveness? How do you assure yourselves, actually, of that, and then us?
Okay, so we do have a monopoly supply here. At the end of the NEO report, because remember, just for the point of doubt, this was a report that was done quite a while ago, and it's only sort of come into the public domain post some of the RFOI work, so quite a lot of the stories moved on since then. So perhaps I can just leap on to what we've been doing subsequently, because, I mean, we've had...
You could answer the question.
Sorry?
You could answer the question.
I know, I'm going to work back to it. So we have had a monopoly supplier, and that was the case under the previous administration, it's the case under the current administration.
It's not an issue, it's not a political issue. This is purely asking.
And it's taken us a long time, but we have now done it for the personal independence payment to grow a market where actually I now have 10 suppliers on a framework contract in order to help me provide medical services contracts in future, 2 of which we've used, as you know, for the BIP contract. So the big story is we have changed this. Now, when you ask me how am I getting value out of my current supplier, the same way I do out of anybody that gives me a monopoly supply. I've got a monopoly supply for my estates, I've got a monopoly supply for my data centres, and not in everything in life do you end up with multiple suppliers simultaneously. But in terms of how we're doing that, I'm trying to manage that contract to make sure I know exactly what their performance is. And the critical thing, which we're going to come back to time and time again this afternoon, I'm sure, is that we are seeking at all times to make sure that we're looking after the quality of what's going on, even though in practice that's causing us some quite big issues to do with the volumes that we can clear.
I mean, you know, we all too often, I'm afraid, hear about promises in the future. What we're here to look at is actually the implementation of this contract. And, you know, I see they've been given a new contract, the PIP, the new PIP contract. So, you know, although you may well be thinking about more people in the market over time, you've not only had a monopoly supplier since 2005, you've extended their contract till 2017?
15.
17?
15.
15. 10-year contract. You've just awarded a new contract to them for a considerable amount of money, so it gives me no great confidence.
Well, you just delighted several things simultaneously, though, haven't you? Because the decision to this contract was let in 2005. Fairly quickly after that, the government of the day decided it wanted to introduce the employment support allowance, and so we had to make a change to that contract to introduce that. Subsequently, ministers wanted to introduce reassessment of all IB cases. It was that, more than anything else, that caused us to want to extend the contract because, for policy reasons, the government concluded that it wanted to do more assessing of incapacity benefits.
I understand all that.
But these are reasons why a contract is then extended. It's not just for lack of imagination.
But we've got a monopoly supplier getting a heck of a lot of public money.
Yes.
And so, you know, for example, let me just ask you, do you know what their profit margin is?
I do.
You do?
Yeah.
Will you share it with us?
It's an open book contract.
Go on then, what is it?
Well, you'll understand that information about profits is actually something which I guard reasonably carefully, because
let me just say to you that where there's a monopoly supplier, it seems to me it's a matter of public interest to understand the gross profit margin.
Yes, and so if the committee, for its own purposes and in confidence, wants to know the answer, then in confidence I will supply it. But you'll understand that actually the information itself, I don't really want to give away my position in respect of other bidders for other contracts in a public forum. And so my contract perfectly properly provides for me to inform Parliament, as consequent upon my personal accountability to you, about what's going on, but not necessarily in open session.
Okay, well, I think I don't know what the committee's view is, but we do want that information. Okay, well,
then I will supply it, and on the basis that you understand why it is that I would want to keep it confidential and not to make it a public domain item,
because
otherwise it will not be a sensible thing to do in value for money terms.
I mean, it just seems to me this is a genuine thing. You've got a monopoly supplier making money out of a public contract, and it's sort of different. There isn't even a commercial confidentiality because they
well, it is because
there
are going to be other contracts will be let, and when those contracts are let, do I want other people to know what profit margin I'm prepared to wear or not? I mean, the whole point of competition is to actually get people to bid to me, blind to what their competitors are doing and blind to the knowledge of what they might be making away profit margin.
The best form of competition is when everybody knows what margins everybody else is making, and therefore you can get the best deal, isn't that?
It's funny, that's not the way that's not the way the economy works, is it?
It's where.
What's the view?
Do you tell your builders?
It's the way you protect the customer against a cartel.
Well, so who is the customer? The customer in this case is the taxpayer, and all I'm asserting is that in commercial negotiations with companies, it would be as wise not to put every bit of information into the public domain if you want me to run that competition wisely.
But surely, too high a rate of profit indicates that the conditions set by you for the performance of that contract are too lax. That the job isn't being doing adequately.
Too high.
And you appear before us, it seems to me, quite often as the defender of these private enterprise organisations put in to run state functions, which are inadequately supervised. The contract is inadequate, and you defend it until we press you, as on the work programme. You then tighten up the performance.
Yes. So
a high rate of profit indicates that you're not tightening up enough.
I'm not aware I've disclosed a high rate of profit, so we're arguing on a false premise here. You've asked me the rate of profit. I've told you I know.
Well, I mean, there
I've
are
told you I'm
public
prepared
reports.
to supply it confidentially.
The public. I'll just say the reports I've seen in the press. One is that they made £42 million in 2010, and that they paid Keith Willman, who runs the contract on your behalf, £800,000, and he got a 22% pay rise in 2009. So that's what's in the public domain.
Since the public domain figure for the contract cost is of the order of 100 million, are you asserting a 40% profit margin then? Because I can guarantee you, without any commercial disclosure,
I think
it's
closer. When I looked at it, it's about 20%. Actually, was what I figured out from the various bits. But they did pay their chief. But with
they
did pay their guy for running this business in the UK £800,000, and he did get a 22% pay rise in 2009. And this is all out of public money, and we are always concerned about issues like that.
Yeah, I'm not aware that there are limits set on what somebody should or should not earn in the delivery of
I think,
commercial companies.
Well, interesting enough, there's been quite a lot in the press about the BBC Director General and what he both gets paid and paid off. And I think there is a concern where private companies make money out of public contracts. I say this so often. Private companies make money out of public contracts. There is a completely legitimate concern, particularly by this committee, to protect the taxpayer's interest.
Okay, so
and that includes what the return to the individual gets is.
Well, so I have a contract which makes it open book, so I know what the profit margin is.
But you don't know what he gets paid.
Sorry?
You don't know what this Mr. William Willman gets paid. Or maybe you do, Dr. Gunyon.
No. I mean, what he's paid, I'm sure we know. But I mean, I'm not sure quite. I'm not sure quite with this conversation. This is a £100 million contract. The profit margin is a material sum.
I'll tell you why it's relevant. It's relevant because you then think that you worry that is this a contract that is providing real value for the taxpayer?
Should we move on to what value it's providing then, rather than starting with the case that it's false?
Mr. Devereux, perhaps I can be helpful, because I do agree that we can't really sort of question you on the basis of anecdote. And other programmes, we're here to look at this group of programmes specifically. It is fair to say, because you conceded it yourself and it's in the NAO report, that prior to summer 2011, the management of the contract was not, I think the term was, lacked sufficient rigour. I think, in order to move on and try and be helpful, in what ways have you addressed that issue so that specifically in terms of value for money, it is delivering better quality value for money for the taxpayer since then?
Okay, so a normal part of the operation of my department is, as you would imagine from my to have an internal audit function which is going around looking to see what areas might be at risk and checking on them. So exactly as you quote, September 2011, I brought the document with me. My internal auditors light on this particular contract and look at the way it's being operated and make suggestions about it. So some of the things that they were observing was that the way in which the governance was operating in terms of who was actually meeting where, what were they talking about, were they the right things to focus on, that they could be tightened up, and we have done precisely that. So we've got a system in place now whereas previously in the internal auditors they were saying the executive board hadn't met for 6 months or so, it's now met every month since actually this report came out. Similarly, it actually said that, slightly contrary to some of the phraseology in this, that while there were audit trails in place to make sure that what was paid to Atos reflected facts that we knew, we could tighten up on that. So we have done precisely that.
So do you now check invoices?
I'm sorry?
Do you now check invoices?
We were checking invoices previously. When I say...
Well, the suggestion was that you weren't.
Well, I brought the National Audit Office's own words as well.
Okay,
they do not say that they weren't checking. Okay. The validation of Atos invoices performed by the commercial management team at Norcross had included verifying the correct unit costs were charged. Verification was going on, according to the National Audit Office. So the issue that we've put in place is actually to make sure that a representative controlled sample of every month's invoices is now gone through in great detail, checking it back to our own systems. Okay, so in the months,
how many do you check now?
In the months of May, June, and July of this month, since we've done that, just one moment, I'll tell you exactly what we've checked.
It's true.
Interest check. So I checked 139 invoices in May.
139
invoices. Yes.
Out of how many?
I think.
How many invoices that month?
I don't know, but it's enough to give me a 95% confidence in the answer. So it's enough to give me a 95% confidence in the answer. So the statisticians decided this was an appropriate level. Okay.
139 out of my guess would be in a month.
You've got no idea what the numbers are because they might bill me monthly.
We know how many assessments they do a year.
Yeah, but they don't bill me per assessment. If I finish the story, 137 is a valid sample as proven by my own auditors.
Well, I think we need information as the basis of...
I will happily tell you what the basis is. Anyway, in May, in June, in July, in August, not a single one of the sample that we took had any incorrectness in it. Not a single one. So when I sat here previously, correctly as Mr. Mitchell said, and said we've been through some history back in the early part of the 2000s where employment contracts were sending in invoices that, with the benefit of hindsight, hadn't been properly validated.
Provider assurance teams that you have on the work programme.
No, I haven't.
Why?
Okay, so I'm coming on to that. I'm trying to answer the questions one at a time. On invoice checking, right, the evidence of the last 4 months is every single one of the representative sample I've checked has been perfectly correct. We should be pleased about that, I think, Chair. Right, provider assurance teams. There is a more general observation in the report that a lot of the performance data is data which comes from Atos, which we then manage against. And the challenge is to say, why wouldn't we be quality assuring that information directly rather than taking their word for it? Now, as I say, in one spectacular example in invoices, their word is actually right. However, I accept this point. And so we've done the following thing. We have a range of contracts, and provider assurance teams, which we went to at great length to go through when we're talking about the work programme, actually are pretty much top of the range when it comes to what we do here. And so I've asked my head of procurement to look at all of our contracts and to ask the question, is there any role that these performance assurance teams could do on those contracts in a similar fashion? And that's the work he's doing now. So my expectation is that you will not find us having to rely on other people's QAing of our own data.
Well, I accept that. Just to round off the earlier discussion, are you saying, as Peter Mandelson would put it, that you're totally relaxed about the rate of profit made by private firms taking over public functions?
No, I'm not totally relaxed because I know what their profit is,
not
and
totally
in my
relaxed,
professional...
You seem very relaxed.
Sorry?
I say you may not be totally relaxed, but you do seem very relaxed.
Well, I'm giving the wrong impression then. if I let a commercial contract to a commercial company, oddly enough, they expect to make a profit, right? Short of that ground rule changing, there'll be a profit. My commercial colleagues, who are well experienced in this, have a judgment to therefore make about whether that is in a reasonable amount of profit, given the nature of the market, given the nature of the service. That judgment is that is a reasonable level, and I'm prepared to go with that. And I'm happy to explain that in more detail in a confidential note, but I do not want to read it in the newspapers, because it will hamper me getting value for money in the future.
Commercial companies with a greater legal expertise and actuarial expertise have been able to run rings around the civil servants negotiating the contract with them.
Well, okay, so fortunately I have one of the best procurement people in government working for me.
You need to convince us. You need to convince us on that.
Since he's head of the international procurement body, then you might at least give him some slack for being competent.
I don't know who it is even.
David Smith. You recall him from when you were there.
We haven't seen him. I don't think has he been before us.
I'm sure he'd be delighted to come.
Maybe the next time we look at the work programme, he'll come. Let me just raise, because I've got some value for money issues remaining on that, because on the PIPS contract, which is the £238 million contract, they've immediately understand it there, subcontracted to Lanarkshire, all the £20 million worth of it. What that makes you sniff, if you're me, I suppose, is why are we, the taxpayer, having to pay double? Because we presumably pay a profit element to Atos, and then they pass on to NHS Lanarkshire a contract where they'll make a bit of money themselves, and you're then left worrying that there's too much slack in the contract, with too much profit. Can you take us through that, please?
Okay, well, we did have some interest from NHS trusts in this contract. At the end of the day, none of them bid directly, in part because for the PIP contract, unlike the one we're talking about now, we've made a series of changes to the nature of the contract. So in particular, we don't have any payments being made to a fixed cost in the PIP contract. Everything is based on outputs. So there's a degree of risk if you bid for this contract that there wouldn't have been previously. Yeah. And so you have to have somebody who is prepared to shoulder that risk. And by inspection, since they actually did ask about this contract but did not bid, the Health Trust did not want to carry that risk. So if somebody is standing in between them and me, taking some risk off me and standing in between the health service, I don't account that as paying double.
Right. Well, perhaps have you in this open contract you have? Do you understand how much profit they make out of the Lanarkshire business?
Well, you're talking about the prospective PIP one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, it's one that's mentioned in the report as well. I mean, there is.
We may be talking at cross purposes, and
no. Okay. Well, I picked it up somewhere. I've clearly picked it up somewhere.
I think it's prospective, so I don't know.
But you've agreed the contract with Atos on PIP.
I've agreed the contract with Atos and with Capita in their different regions. So I dare say, actually, we know what the financial model profit level is in that. I don't have it in front of me.
And you could let us have the details of that so that we can satisfy ourselves that the value for money in the subcontracting relative to your assertion that it's a transfer of risk is appropriate for the taxpayer.
Well, I'm just trying to see how you would do that calculation from information that I hold. I was answering a different question. You wanted to know why I hadn't contracted directly with the health authorities, which the answer is they didn't bid and they didn't want to carry the risk.
I said it's a double. It looks to me, if you pass contract to an organisation, then it passes on a subcontract.
Yes. Well, if they were adding,
there's a double profit element.
If they were adding no value, you'd be absolutely correct. But in order to bid for this contract,
well, that's really what I want you to demonstrate to us. Really, that was what I was asking.
Well, I will happily write you a note about
that. Okay, Gita.
Can I take you to the issue of the appeals?
Of
the appeals process.
The appeals.
Yes. Because obviously in terms of value for money and a contract that's performing well, I would accept the arguments made by ministers that there is a need for an appeals process. The question really is whether having a level of 40% almost is acceptable. And what is the cost to the department of such a level of appeals within the system?
Okay. So in paragraph 3.10, page 25 of the report, National Audit Office comments on the appeals, and I thought they put this pretty fairly. The level of successful appeals is often viewed as a measure of the quality of medical work. There are dangers in such a comparison. My view is that the numbers of appeals are too high, that the numbers of appeals that are succeeding are too high. I share the NAO's view that you cannot simply make the simple assertion that that's a problem to do with Atos. Shall I expand on that?
Yes, please. Yes, please do.
The tribunals are standing at the end of a process, which is the consequence of all the laws you've passed and the procedures my own staff operate, and the contracting out to Atos of a well-defined test defined by my top doctor. So the question you ask yourself is, when it gets to the end of that process and an appeal is upheld, and they come to a different conclusion, what's happening there, right? Now, just today, and I do apologise for this today, but the PSE timetable wasn't in mind when this was planned. We've published the first information we've had back from some work we've been doing with the tribunals since July. So since July, we've managed to agree with the tribunal judges that they will give us a principal reason why they have overturned the appeal, in order for us to begin to understand what goes on, because their previous practice was to sometimes say as little as I've upheld the appeal or I've turned it down, and give us no information. So some information was published at 9:30 this morning, which went through all of those appeals. I've got my glasses on to find it now. I'll put it in one moment. Everything but what I want. If I just stick with ESA for a moment then, there were 13,000 appeals in the period 9th of July to the 31st of October, and in about 2/3 of those cases the judges used the little drop-down menu they have to come with the principal reason. For 1/3 of the cases, they didn't use the tool. So in the figures I'm going to quote you, I'm going to gross them up as if they were the whole lot, because it's just easy to do the percentages. So the sorts of things which the judges were saying were in 18. Forgive me. How would you like me to present this? The figures I've got in front of me that were published are expressed as percentages, where the last third have no reasons associated with them at all. Do you want me to? So you mean that
in the ones that didn't, in the ones that did have a reason, the proportion in that
only adds up to 66. So
shall
I express it as if it adds up to 100?
As a proportion of the 66.
Yes. Okay. Yes, well, I have to do some arithmetic as I do this, right? So bear with me. It means doubling it. Anyway, in about 1/3 of all the cases, the judges are saying in their drop-down menu that they reached a different conclusion on substantially the same facts. So 1/3 of all the appeals which they're reaching a different view, they're literally saying in terms, we've reached a different view on the same facts. On 60-ish% of the cases, they're saying that they reached a different view based on oral evidence presented at the hearing. And you'll recall that these hearings are, regrettably at the moment, a long time after the event, and whether or not the condition of the person at the appeal is the same as it was when the test is something we don't know in that. But then, last of all, I'm afraid, coming back to the question you asked me, the medical assessment relied on by the decision maker from Atos contained a significant error, less than... Contained a significant error.
And that was in what proportion?
Less than 1%. So I am thinking, here is a piece of evidence, all right? It's only one piece of evidence, and as I said, this is the primary reason they're reducing. But I'm sorry?
So but 30% you said came to a different conclusion on the same evidence, which means not necessarily that the evidence that they've received has been wrong, but the judgment of the Atos assessor has been wrong. Except
that the judgments, if I may, are made by my staff on the basis of the Atos assessment. Decisions in this department are made by decision makers.
So your staff are incompetent, are they, in 1/3 of cases?
Okay, so you can.
I mean,
read,
you're taking the blame rather than Atos. Is that it?
You can read into this. No, I'm not saying that. But we have to be really clear about this, because this is precisely the reason why I asked about who's going to appear. The thing that we're looking at is a process which is based on law and decision makers in my department with the contracted out tests designed by my doctor, right? And I'm really keen to be very precise about what evidence there is about what Atos is doing and what the department is doing and what the failings in the process are. We'll come on, I'm sure, to Harrington in a minute and all the evidence he's produced about how to make the system run. But this business about what the tribunals are saying is, if I may, only one of probably 6 different things which give me a general sense about where the Atos testing is. So let me try them quickly on you. We invite our decision makers to send back a report if they don't think they can work with it because it doesn't have the right information on it. We set a target with Atos that they don't expect them to be sending back more than 1%. They send back 0.1%. The individuals going through this assessment can ask for a copy of this report, and there's a complaints process to Atos. The total number of people who complain to Atos about anything, even including the report, is less than 0.6%. If I compare that with the complaint levels to the GMC at 3.5% and to the Dental Council, which is 1.6%, it's not out of order. If I then say, and actually even before we got to this drop-down menu with the tribunal, there was already a system in place which goes under the slightly spy movie title of Protocol 10, by which, having heard the tribunal case and made a decision, the tribunal is invited, if they think the report was so shoddy as actually to be a material cause, to send it back to the department. We've had 23 back.
But let me just, I can't find the figure now. Maybe I can be helped by the NAO. You sent back, your decision makers already overturn to how many a year? Or in the period? There's a figure in the report about how many are overturned by the department from Atos's recommendation. You must be able to help me on that, Mr. Devereux.
I think it's 6%. I mean, but
no, how many? 200,000? What is it? I'll find it somewhere.
Oh, is this the thing that you put into the newspapers?
No, it's in the report.
No, it's also.
No, that's out of the 5, but the assessors send back. The assessors overturn the Atos view on how many?
No, I
find
don't
it
think
somewhere.
So. No, it's in the key facts paragraph, page 4. Well, there's at least 120,000 there. This may be the one you're talking about. And this is indeed to do with quality. And what we've already been discussing is within the contract itself, there is a threshold which says that I don't expect to see more than 5% of the report.
Oh, here we are.
Yeah, 37,000.
It's 44,000. Sorry, this is a PQ that I saw. The PQ, DWP overturned Atos's recommendation on 44,000 occasions in less than 2 years. So there's another little thing, so we find that
hang on a minute.
That's before.
Hang on a minute. I've just been told by a colleague.
You just produced new figures to us. All I'm saying to you that among the figures you've produced new figures on an analysis very helpfully of what happens to the tribunal system. Before it ever gets to tribunal, 44,000. Okay. Maybe Dr. Gunyon can know these.
I can explain this because I suspect this is the 6% we just talked about. So your colleague a moment ago.
Is that the 6%?
Your colleague a
44,000 individuals.
Your colleague a moment ago was implying that because it was reached a different decision on the same facts, it was a fault of Atos. And I said, no, my decision makers make their decisions, right? Now, those decisions.
Are your decision makers doctors?
Sorry?
Are they doctors?
No, they're decision makers because the decision.
So what's their background?
They're social security staff.
They're what?
They're my staff. They're just ordinary.
But they're not. They haven't got a medical background or anything like that.
With respect, the decision they're making isn't based on the medical. It isn't for them to be a doctor, right? If I had to have doctors, I would get doctors. But can I just finish the answer to your question? You're implying earlier on that somehow or other what Atos does just gets ticked through. It does not get ticked through because the decision makers look at the evidence and make a recommendation. That 44,000, I'm sure will be the case. If the number of cases where Atos having recommended course A, the decision maker has produced a different answer. Okay? Now, that is evidence.
What else will the decision maker look at apart from the medical assessment in deciding? I mean, either you are fit or you're not fit for work, or you're.
I'm afraid it's more complex. Do you want to explain what the...
Neil, have you got something you want to add on that?
The decision maker is not simply reading a report that says yes or no and going yes or no.
Yeah, but the decision is based on the medical condition of the individual and therefore their fitness for work.
Perhaps, Chair, I can help the committee. I think what you have to remember is that the healthcare professional is taking into account the evidence that the claimant has provided on the ESA 50, any further medical evidence that has been provided from the individual's healthcare professional, is doing the assessment, and this is the independent objective assessment part of things. All of that information is then available to the decision maker. The Atos Healthcare's professional makes a recommendation.
The decision maker, let's take a bit of common sense and not bureaucracy into this. A decision maker on whether or not somebody is eligible for ESA, should be put on the, I can go back to work, or should not, must be on the medical evidence. What else do you have regard to apart from that?
Indeed, but the role of the decision maker is to check that all the evidence has been considered, that the conclusion that the healthcare professional has reached appears to reflect all the evidence, and that the healthcare professional has taken into account the evidence, and that the healthcare professional's recommendations are then applied correctly to the descriptors, which is the basis on which points are awarded, which determines entitlement to benefit.
That's gobbledygook.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Complete gobbledygook.
I mean, it's not wholly your fault, because actually, dare I say, it's the NAO report's fault as much as anything else, because if you look at page 25, paragraph 3.10, it does actually say, without specifying, about the danger of extrapolating too much from this 38%. There are dangers in such a comparison. An appeal may be successful, etc. In addition, a decision made by the Department on Benefit Assessment will draw on other sources of information as well as the medical assessment. Now, you haven't told us what that is, and the NAO unhelpfully hasn't told us what that is. So I think the Chair is quite right to say, what are those other factors that inform your decision? Because that would be very helpful for all of us to be made aware of.
It is not infrequently the case that, in spite of attempts to get further medical evidence early in the process, it hasn't been received at the time the assessment is done, or indeed even when the decision maker is considering. Now, the decision maker then has an opportunity to seek further medical evidence.
But the decision maker is not a doctor.
Also,
it doesn't matter if they're looking at other evidence.
They're looking at medical.
But there may be other evidence as well that is relevant that the individual will provide, and sometimes this happens. One of the things that Harrington recommended and has been introduced in the process is a call from the decision maker when they've reached the decision, which gives the individual an opportunity to indicate that there is other evidence that they would like taken into account. In addition, the decision...
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, it may be that, for example, they have got where the evidence has been taken from their general practitioner, but actually they perhaps have a mental health problem, and their community mental health services, community psychiatric nurse actually knows more about them on a regular basis.
Well, why
than
didn't the
GP.
Atos professional?
Well, but the whole point about this process is to make sure that things are picked up if they're missed.
Why didn't the Atos professional
Because it may be that the individual didn't indicate who that individual was. The one source that is always or almost always provided is the details of the general practitioner. It can be very difficult to get information about other healthcare professionals.
This is represent a number of different issues. I think we are looking at value for money, but that also means the service to the constituent. And let's just focus on mental health for a moment. Many of my constituents with mental health problems are very high incidence in my constituency, really want to work, but they do need recognition and understanding that they can't always work full time and that there are a lot of issues. And one of the issues that comes to me here, with all of this procedure you can go through in endless detail, is the experience for the individual is often humiliating, it's cumbersome, and actually if they knew what they could present at the first initial hearing with an Atos healthcare provider, they would do that. But they have gone along with often very false impressions, thinking they're going to have a chat with a doctor and it's going to be supportive, and they feel told me about their feelings of humiliation, particularly people with mental health problems. And many of them would provide that information, but I don't think they were aware, I wasn't aware actually till now, that you could provide that information right at the beginning of the attitude. Wouldn't that smooth the line and
there have been changes along the way, including to the ESA 50, the form that the claimant is asked to complete, which actually makes that now much clearer, and we're continuing to improve
to the individual.
To the individual.
Well, I mean, just looking back,
we're just adding in all these. The problem is, every time you can add something in, it's good, I suppose, but it's very costly and time consuming, and it doesn't make it very good value for money. And if at the beginning it was just. It's to do with the framework of the way the department has set it. And I take what you say, Mr. Devereux, that Parliament has to take some responsibility here too. But the framework's been set to make it as complicated as possible. So while there may be checks along the way, those checks are overused. Because if it was done better in the first place, my constituents wouldn't be having to go through this pain of constant reassessment, appeal, tribunal, and so on.
So when the legislation was passed of this new benefit, Parliament required perfectly properly that it was subject to an annual review as to its efficacy, done by a leading physician, who is Professor Harrington, and his third report, which, by the way, is out tomorrow and will be dealing with mental health issues in fluctuating conditions in particular, consistently he's come back to say, how can I make this process go better? All right? Because it's actually quite a complicated thing to do. Right? So anybody that thinks that medical testing of benefit claimants is a walk in the park, then it clearly is not. Now, on successive occasions, he's come back and said, well, first of all, with Harrington, the first one he did, he said, I think it would be good if the Atos assessment itself wrote a paragraph in English that just explained in words of one syllable why they've reached this conclusion, because prior to that was not a requirement. So we put in this individual assessment in order to try to make sure that the individual at least could read why the doctor reached the conclusion they have. We put in calls to people before this decision is made to make sure that people understand what their evidence requirements are. We are trying to improve it. I agree with you. I don't want to do this by adding lots and lots of extra steps. But you can't, I think, turn around and say that the government hasn't been trying to have independent reviews of how this is working, and pretty consistently, Professor Harrington is saying, look, this would make an improvement, but actually you paid attention to what I said last time, and it's getting better, and you need to keep on down this track. One of the things he's been particularly interested in, coming back to the chair's point, is actually making sure that decision makers, proper decision makers, feel empowered to make decisions based on the collection of things in front of him. And if it's been your perception that this is a pure sort of medical test and all I need is a doctor and then you get benefit, end of story, then we're all at misapprehension about how benefits are determined, and we probably better drop you a proper line to explain why it is the decision making is best developed from the doctors.
Actually, you made a fantastic job of making something negative which could be potentially positive, because actually what you're saying is
that's not my role.
what you're saying is it's not a robotic process which says computer says no, off. Actually you are, and our constituents might not agree with that. So what you're doing, you've got objective criteria for the strict medical assessment, but as a sort of fail-safe, what you're saying, from what I'm getting, which accounts for the 38% figure, is that you've also got subjective criteria that are added into the mix for the assessors to make a decision. And I think that's quite a good news story, actually, because it means that there is an element of fairness in the process. I mean, or am I being a little bit naive there?
Well, I sort of bow to my doctor colleague, but I mean, so whether a medical condition is an objective one or a subjective one is I'm not going to split hairs on that, because actually it's quite difficult to test some of this thing in an objective fashion, particularly fluctuating condition. Nonetheless, we are trying our very best to set out very clearly, as is done in legislation, what are the conditions under which we might desire that you have the capacity to work. That is, on a test which has got peer reviewed and been tested to the last, the right sort of test. Now, Professor Harrington has not said in his first two reviews, what a complete waste of time, Bill, you made a really bad job of that, I'd start again. He's actually been saying it would be better if in this part of the process we wrote a paragraph, it would be better in this part of the process if you rang them up and explained it a bit. He's talking about smoothing through a process which could be improved. We did some work on the descriptors. He was pleased that we did work on the descriptors. So progressively we are trying to make this better. But I don't think it falls down to a sort of doctor says yes, computer says yes, off you go benefit, because that is not the way it works.
Understand. You'll have to drop us, because I don't understand what an assessor in job, presumably in a job centre plus office, is that right?
No, it's in the benefit system.
In the benefit, I don't understand what other information. I mean, and just going back, there were 44,000 that you overturned just between May and December 2010.
Overturned is a very pejorative word.
Well, you did overturn. You overturned the recommendation.
We reached a decision that was different from what the Atos...
You overturned the recommendation from... There are two things, actually, and we're getting a bit muddled. There's the second chance by the assessor, and then there's the appeal process. So you first of all, you get assessed by a doctor. You then get assessed by some DWP assessor sitting somewhere anonymously. You then have an appeal process. And what we find is 44,000 between May and December 2010 may have got better, were overturned in the second, and then 38% overturned in the appeals. So there are two sets.
Housing benefit was taken and privatised by local authorities. There's an assumption that it was an IT system, and because the private sector produced IT, not the public sector, privatised that, and the whole problem solved. What it didn't take into account was that human beings are in the mix. And I slightly worry, Dr. Cunningham, that not second guessing your professional qualifications and skills, but that assessing people for work assessing people for work is not a new system. There's occupational health that exists across the board in the public and private sector. The DWP has done this before. So it seems to me that even though Robert Devereux says the changes being proposed by Professor Harrington are minor, that they could have been better written in at the beginning, because you've still got this very costly system that you've been operating now for a while that puts cost on the taxpayer and humiliates many of our constituents who are having to go through this very long-winded process when actually, even good decision or bad for them, decision they agree with or not, swifter, generally speaking, as long as it's accurate, has to be better, surely, because it's putting people through the mill, through the ringer.
I think you're absolutely right in that assessing fitness for work is not straightforward, and the assessment is not a tick. Just stay with me a second. It's not a tick box assessment, and that is one of the challenges, because there is another significant element of judgment and opinion by the healthcare professionals, and that's why their training is actually quite critical to this, because it's clearly very important that they do actually think about the individual, because this is about the impact of an individual's condition on that individual's capability for work. So there's huge individual variation as well. But one of the challenges, because this is an assessment for entitlement to benefits, one of the real challenges is to try and ensure that irrespective of where the individual is in the country, which healthcare professional they're actually seen by, for the same condition that has the same impact, they will get the same outcome. Now, that is a huge challenge, and that is one of the difficulties in this whole process, is managing to set out something that can be encapsulated in a way that can be consistently applied to individuals across Great Britain by a whole range of different healthcare professionals, and that can provide a basis for a legal appeal. So not only do we have the challenges of an assessment that has to be robust from a professional point of view, and that's clearly one of my challenges, but in addition, that then has to be able to be converted into legal language that will actually work on appeals. And it is actually incredibly difficult. It is much more difficult than many of the less challenging assessments that may be made about fitness for work, where they're not subject to the same level of scrutiny. This whole assessment is heavily scrutinised. An opinion from a doctor or a nurse in general is not subject to the same challenges that this assessment actually is, going through a whole appeals process and so on. So we really do have to make sure that it can be applied consistently.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges.
One quick point though. I mean, I don't want to give you the sense that actually Bill sits in a room and makes this stuff up. All right, good as he is. All right, so the process by which this difficult assessment was brought to fruition was done with the help of all the sort of people you'd expect in some good open policy making.
Well, that's why you've got to watch all this, because the BMA in their annual conference voted against, said it was a whole load of RUBB, as I remember.
Indeed, but I think, to be fair, we have actually had very constructive discussions with the BMA, and the BMA, to be fair, have been involved over the years, as you, Chair, probably remember yourself from way back. The BMA have been engaged constructively. We met with them recently, the Minister met with them, and they are very keen to work with us to help try and ensure that their input is properly captured. So I'm hoping that we will have a more positive
we'll come back to
view.
the EMA a bit later, perhaps.
I just wanted to and it's sort of in. We made a remark that that you shouldn't necessarily regard tribunal successful appeals or the level of appeals as indicative of something. But just going to some of the evidence we heard, the witnesses before you came in, they were suggesting that the experience might be that there was a reasonably high level of appeals where the department had scored the claim as more or less zero, and they'd actually gone up to really quite high scorings. Can I just ask, are you aware of that? I mean, and I know it's sort of wrong to introduce evidence at the last moment, but just are you aware of that, and are you aware at what level that is happening, and do you think it's significant? May I ask?
Go on.
I think what you have to remember is that a tribunal takes place quite a long time often after the original decisions have been made. The tribunal is looking at the individual many months on. Now, although they are there to assess whether the decision that was made at the time was right or not, inevitably, if the individual's condition has not resolved or indeed has progressed, that is going to influence. The individual themselves will have had time to reflect upon the decision that was made. There are all sorts of things that can influence it. At the same time, there will be cases where we didn't get it right, and that is the whole purpose of the Appeals Tribunal, and where the assessment, I mean, we've tried to learn over time, and that's why we did the internal review of the assessment relatively early after the WCA's introduction, where the assessment hasn't properly captured certain conditions, so there will be elements of that as well. But there will also be, I suspect, not an insignificant proportion of cases where it is a combination of the individual appearing in front of the tribunal, the individual's condition having perhaps moved on, the individual themselves having thought about it, and then the potential for the tribunal to reach a different decision to be there. And when they do that, they then allocate points as they see fit.
And only just to complete that, and the other point that was made to us around that was that perhaps when the initial assessment was being made, it was made without a great deal of supporting material, and B, in a pretty rapid interview, and therefore that might so that you might take these relative changes in scores as being indicative of question marks about the initial appraisal, the reliability.
Certainly, further medical evidence, if it wasn't available originally, will be a factor, and that's why one of the things we're focused on is trying to get further medical evidence where it is appropriate at the start of the process, where it can actually be taken into account.
So that's really where you prefer it to be, at the start?
Yes.
It's really important just to have a scale question here. I mean, we cannot possibly sit in front of you and say with 150,000 people going through applying for the ESA and IB reassessment every month that we won't find some cases like this, okay? The question is, having read out to you 6 lots of statistics that give you some sense that quality-wise the Atos contract is doing the test which Bill designed, I'm trying to invite you to work out whether or not the cases that you are hearing, which are bound to be the ones you hear about because they're the most startling, aren't actually the ones for which you really hope that the system runs.
No, I don't think it's the one. Jackie wants to come in. I've just got to come back to you on that. It's not the ones that we're hearing. We all get them in our constituency surgery. It's the fact that you overturn so many, and it's the fact that so many are overturned at tribunal. That is a massive number of, and a lot of people won't go. You know this, Mr. Devereux. You know that they won't go. There are a lot of people who will take it. I can tell you from my own constituency, a lot of people are too scared to tackle the system. They won't take it to tribunal.
I've just told you that the judges themselves are saying that in a third of the cases they're making a different decision to my decision maker based on exactly
the decision's wrong. It doesn't matter why. The decision's wrong.
Sorry,
it gets overturned.
You can't do it like this, I'm afraid. We have a test in place, right? The tribunal is saying in a third of the cases they upheld, the ones they dismiss. In a third of those, they actually haven't argued with the evidence. They just reached a different conclusion. All right. Now, in those cases, I do think you have to be careful about adding up all of these percentages and saying there must be something obviously wrong. That's not the obvious answer at all.
Jackie. But what wrong
is in your department and not in Atos?
Well, okay, so what I've been trying to say to you is that this is a complex process which, according to the way that Parliament passed the legislation, we have consistently had an independent review of. The last two reviews, and the third one out tomorrow, has made positive comments about what we've done to try to make this as good as possible. They do not include simply ripping it up and starting again. And I do suggest the committee looks at what Harrington publishes when it comes out tomorrow, because he will be saying other things about how he thinks the department is processed. So I am indeed saying that if there's an issue with this, particularly around the appeals and the rest of it, it's a process question, and you should ask me as the accountable person. I'm trying to distinguish between that and whether you've seen any evidence at all yet that Atos itself is not doing quality.
If I take the point you're making about this will be part of a process, so you're saying that this idea that we're overturning decisions is meaningless. But can I just ask, typically how long does a claimant have to wait for an appeal if it goes to tribunal?
I'm not sure I got that number with me.
I think it's 6 months.
Because that 6 months can have quite a material outcome on that claimant if ultimately the decision is overturned. And we need to look from the point of view of value for money as to whether we're actually delivering the policy outcome we're setting out, which is to make sure that those people that do deserve support do get it.
Right. So we're all clear what's being paid while the appeal is in process, are we?
Pardon?
We're all clear what is being paid while the appeal is in process.
Yeah.
So, in the event that you are put into the work-related group or to the support group, you're getting more than the JSA, but the JSA rates.
Yeah, but you might only get is it contributions based for a finite period of time, if depending on where you are in the life cycle of your claim. So I've certainly had constituents who've had their money stopped.
So I mean, we're going to be in exactly the same place, and as will the Minister when he appears in the Select Committee in 2 days' time, on wanting this to be as quick a process as possible.
Yeah.
And one of the problems that we have had, which is just worth pausing on, because otherwise I'm not sure if we're going to get there, is that when, as I said, Professor Harrington came along with his first report and said it would be really good if there was this personalised statement so people could see what's going on. Yeah. Unsurprisingly, training the doctors to do that and getting them to do it well actually caused quite an extra amount of work going on because they had to get familiar with it. So the time that it took to do an assessment suddenly went up sharply. That in itself generated some fairly substantial backlogs that your constituents will be going through now, and that in particular is adding to the current elapsed time to get to appeal. It's not what should be the case when the system is working properly, but we've had two big shocks to the system. One in terms of constructing the changes that Harrington have asked for, and secondly, and this is slightly to do with the way in which the whole subject is reported, the ability to recruit people to want to work in this industry, given the sort of comments that are being made about people who are working in the industry, is itself negative. That, in my view, that's wholly misplaced, and it's part of the reasons why I want to give the evidence I'm giving today. Because without that, you won't have a functioning system, and it will take even longer.
No smoke without fire. Mr. Sayers, Neil Sayers wants to come. I've got a whole load of people. Neil Sayers and Justin, Fiona, Austin, Guito.
Really just to provide a bit of information to answer the question about how long cases are taken through MOJ. According to the Ministry of Justice information, 25% of ESA appeals are disposed of in 8 weeks or less, 50% in 14 weeks or less, and the remainder in 26 weeks or less. So it's
a lot of
yes, luck of the draw.
Right. Justin, Fiona, Austin, Guito.
Thank you. I want to focus on a comment you made earlier about shouldering the risk, and just to see whether you're satisfied with some of the arrangements in place. So starting off on 2.11, it clearly states that if the actual referral volumes are more than 20% over or under these volumes for 3 consecutive months, then either party can seek to renegotiate the contract. Yet surely you should also have a second measure in place that it's looked at annually. So, for example, it could be that you're 50% off for 2 months consecutively, then you're fine again for 1 month, and then continue that cycle. So is that something that has been considered?
Yes, so there's quite a bit in the report about forecasting, and this is another area where I am going to explain what the departments are on it. So we are pretty good, actually, at trying to project, difficult as it might imagine, how many people might claim ESA in the course of a year across the nation. Oddly enough, it's quite difficult to work out exactly which city that will be in, month by month. And so if I just take the example I got here, over the course of April to September, we provided monthly information to the contractor, and our overall forecast was out over that period by just 3%, right? Quite a relatively small number. The individual figures for an individual area can be anything up to 30% out in 1 month. So, with the best will in the world, I've got quite a good grip on a rather difficult subject, how many people are ill and poor enough to want to claim benefit, trying to disaggregate that individually. Now, these humps and kinks all smooth out over time, obviously, and that's the whole point of them. But the reason that we talk about it in annual terms is because actually anything much finer than that, I'm not sure is going to have any validity.
Now, so I get that, so we accept the system's going to fluctuate up and down.
Yeah.
On the specific point about them shouldering the risk, therefore we are making an assumption that the risk is potentially 20% either way, either time. How confident are you that Atos have that capacity and flexibility to meet that 20% variation?
Well, the evidence is that they have not least because I don't want to have to pay for it, bought sort of 25% more capacity than they need, so that every time the forecast hits plus 25%, I can do it at the same speed I normally do, but when it hits minus 25%, they're all twiddling their thumbs. So they're basically making judgments about how many they need across the system, right? The number of healthcare professionals which Atos has deployed has consistently risen since the contract was created, right up to date, even though the amount of money we're spending on Atos is stayed pretty much constant, by the way. Mm-hmm. But what they're trying to do is to say, well, how many do I need given what I'm being told about the year ahead, essentially? Mm-hmm. But we are not in the comment I was making about risk was a particular one to do with standing in between them and a supplier. In this particular case, we're saying to them, look, this is the price we're prepared to pay if you meet these targets, and if you're not meeting these targets, we won't be paying it. But the volume adjustment in an ordinary month, you'd expect them to sort of try to win that back by managing their. So
on that point, in 2008 and 2009, when they were actually at 68% of capacity, why were they rated so poorly?
Why were they rated so poorly?
Yeah, their service.
Well, because I suspect, again, what you're quoting then is the overall size of. I'm trying to find the right.
Para 212, isn't it?
Yeah.
In end of the para 2008-9, actual referrals for all service lines was 68% of contract referrals.
Yeah, okay. So 2008-9 is from memory when ESA is introduced. So October 2008 is when
ESA. And now it's at what percent then?
Well, now I've just quoted you.
But that was for a month, wasn't it?
No, that was for 6 months. So,
6 months.
So to be clear, what I've just quoted you, I've got in front of me for the service lines for ESA across the country, the forecast we offered them for April, for May, for June, for July, and in aggregate over that period, our forecast is 3% out compared with what actually turned out. So in practice, we're pretty much on the money for what the numbers are in today's world. Now, in the year in which you introduce a brand new benefit and run off an entirely old benefit, I'm possibly not surprised with the benefit of hindsight that we were a bit further out.
Yeah, and I think
that's not where the centre of gravity is today.
And I think that's a fair point. But then turning to figure 3 on the following page, you made a point just now where you said that you will pay a fair price. There is an element of risk for the supplier Atos because of the variation that comes into place, and that you are relaxed for them to make a profit. But if we just look at 2010, they barely make a quarter of the year where they're above forecast, where 3/4 of the year they're below forecast, which suggests to me they haven't got the capacity, they haven't got the flexibility, yet they are still making a profit. Are you satisfied with that?
The contract has been set on the basis that about half of the money is paid in respect to their fixed costs, and half of it is based on variable costs. Those variable also got prices associated with them, and those are the prices that we're paying. This picture to do with where the volumes are, is showing you variation against a forecast. And if you actually look at the volumes that are actually going through here, as opposed to the variation against a forecast, you get a completely different story. Now, I did wonder about whether I could just hold something up and show you, but I don't think that's going to work. So throughout this period, the volume of things that we're asking the company to do is growing. It's growing because, first of all, we've put the IB reassessment in there, so we've now added a whole new million cases to go through, and it's also growing time-wise because we're asking them to do more. So if Harrington comes along and asks them for the personalised paragraph, and it starts to take them 65 minutes, not 50 or something like that, then all of a sudden the amount of work that needs to be done is growing. So the numbers of healthcare professionals have risen from something like 500 to 1,000, I think. No, that's the wrong one, forget that. It's risen strongly, and the volume of work they're doing. This chart is simply comparing a forecast against that, and that doesn't tell you anything about the underlying effort which Atos is having to put in to make it go.
Now, I want to return to the subject about the invoicing that we touched on earlier. Can you explain why not all invoices are checked? Now, I owned only a relatively small business. I can assure you when I was providing invoices and supplier ones came into me, every last one was checked over with a fine-tooth comb, and there was an alarming amount of mistakes that were made. Why would it be any different here?
Well, that's a good question, and I guess I guess the answer is going to turn out to be whether or not the amount of risk that you perceive in the system is worth the additional cost of doing the further checking. So if in 137, which the chair thinks is very low, but nonetheless it is a statistically significant sample, I find there are no errors, then would you rather I hired some more civil servants and checked every single one of them when on the evidence I can get a statistically reliable answer that there's no problem? Now, you might choose that, but that's not the way I've been funded to operate.
On that particular point, presumably Atos were then aware that they would then be audited. So those 137, they had advance notice of that. Yes. So we would be assured they would make extra effort to be reliable. But how confident can we be before we were doing that?
So the internal audit report said that you could only have limited assurance of it prior to that because they weren't doing the same sort of checking. They were doing different sorts of checking. So, if you run an organisation as large as mine, you are dependent on people thinking about risk and control environments. We have recorded perfectly explicitly in the 2010-11 Statement of Internal Control in our accounts that this was one of 5 or 6 areas that we were bothered about because we knew it ourselves. We've done something about it and we fixed it. Now, I regard that as a good story, but in a very large operation there will always be something which is just at the point at which it needs some attention, I'm afraid.
Nearly there. You set the level of 5% that you would consider to be acceptable in terms of unsatisfactory medical assessment. What made you set that figure rather than, say, 3% or 7%?
Okay, I'm going to get Bill to answer that, but can I just make an observation because, again, came back to just being really clear what it says. We asked them to produce reports of a certain professional quality. All right? The fact that they, on occasion, fail that is not synonymous with the answer was wrong. Right? I do need you to clock that because you can actually have something which has been sort of ill prepared or ill thought through, but nonetheless, when you look at all the evidence, you still got the right answer. Now, as to why it's set at 5, actually, this is by comparison with other things in the rest of the medical section, which is why I've brought a good document.
Before you answer that, can I add a question to that? Because who does the 5%? As I understand it, somewhere in the report it says that the Atos themselves do it, and then you just, so there's 5% that they self-check, and then you presumably check a tiny sample as the ones they check. Perhaps you could answer that too.
You're comparing 2 different 5% is the quality target, right? Which is different from the sampling rate, but you're absolutely right. They sample, and we check the sample.
How much do you check? All the sample?
We check a proportion of it. In fact,
what proportion? I mean, I'd like to break that down. When you the two go together. 2 questions go together.
Okay. One of the important things, if
6% is what we check.
Pardon me?
We check 6%.
6% of their sample?
Yeah.
Yes.
And how big is their sample?
10,636.
Pardon?
10,636.
Which is what proportion?
0.58%.
5 to 8.
0.58%.
They check 0.58% and you check 6% of the 0.58%, which my arithmetic's too terrible, but it makes it...
About 0.1.
What?
About 0.1.
0.1.
That 0.5% is...
Which isn't very good. Given, again, I understand all the things you're doing.
Sorry, when you say not very good, can we just come back to what figures and statistics mean, right? That the point of audit is to find a percentage which works to the satisfaction of the auditor in order to do completeness. Please ask the National Audit Office whether a number can, in absolute sense, be not very good.
I'll tell you why I don't think it's very good. Because a whole proportion are overturned by you internally, and then 38% are overturned at appeal.
But
you can't get away from that. You can say you're doing better.
I can get away from it because you keep chopping and changing from different things. In answering the question, is there a basis on which you can make a decision about whether a system is working properly? It is absolutely fair cop to use an auditing system, and you would expect the auditor to draw a percentage sample. You cannot simply say off that sample, that number sounds too low. You have to know what the figures are.
I tell you what I judge you on, and which you're not. I judge you on the fact that your internal assessors, goodness knows, I still don't understand what basis, overturn some of the
But that's not
assessments,
the point we're discussing right now.
And you lose 38% of cases at appeal. That suggests that the decisions aren't accurate.
Well, I've tried to explain, but I clearly have to keep going at it, that actually there is more things going on here than just what happens in the medical assessment test. Okay? So when I told you, as I had before, that a third of all the cases the tribunal overturns because they use the same facts and reach a different conclusion, that is not to do with the evidence, is it? Right?
It is to do with the judgment of the professionals.
It's to do with the judgment of how the law applies to those facts. Okay. Now, you can screw your face about it, but this is the way the world works. And maybe you might ask Judge Martin.
It isn't a legal issue.
Maybe you'd like to ask the President of the Tribunal of Appeal to come and explain how it works. Then
we will. I had hoped that he would come, but he wasn't available. But you've got to just understand that level of tribunal success leaves you, for individuals, leaves you very sceptical, which you clearly are not, about the efficacy of your systems.
About the efficacy of my system, I will accept that, right? That these appeal levels are too high, there are too many, and there are too many. That tells you that the whole shooting match is not working properly, but it also tells you that since the only data you've got is data for appeals now, which we've just established are 6-9 months after the fact, they're telling you about what the system...
We just told them to decide within rather fewer than 6 or 9 months.
But some way after the actual assessment was made itself, right? Because there's a long process in this, including preparing for the appeal itself. The point is, we're looking at the rearview mirror, looking at the appeals. So one of the things I have asked the department to do, because this ought to be a bit of information that we both want, is to try and tie up at what point in that appeal that I've now got a decision on, where did that individual go through the system? Was it pre the first Harrington report? Was it pre the second Harrington report? Which process are we testing? Because you're eliding the two at the moment and saying everything that happens in appeal must be telling me something about today's process, and I don't accept that because we consistently improved it.
Well, I'll just say the appeals, again, it was a PQ. I don't know where you got your information from, but the PQ answer from DWP, April to June 2012, the average wait for appeal was 5 months, 19.3 weeks. Average.
Yeah.
So I don't know where you got your data from.
And I have been told that in my region they don't open the appeals for 190 days.
Yeah. Sorry, so aren't we agreeing with my point then? My point is that what you're seeing in the tribunals is a decision being revisited that was made many months earlier.
Well, I don't know when you implemented the whole of Harrington 1, 2.
June 11.
June 11. So the appeals in 2012 should have reflected that.
Well,
they're 5-6 months is what the average.
Well, we would hope so. But remember when I told you there's a backlog there, people are going to go through trying to get this right.
Yeah, but that's the 5 months backlog.
Anyway,
that was that. I'm talking about April to June 2012.
And the changes we made are consequent upon all the other things that we've been doing. So,
2011.
Anyway, the point of the story is we do need to track for appeals what date the actual decision was being made on to track.
Okay, I'm just sorry. Justin, we've had Austin.
Oh, can I finish my...
Oh, sorry.
Standing questions.
Yes. What is the professional evidence that determines you to set at 5%? And the reason I'm asking that is with any commercial contract that you as the supplier will gear up to make sure you hit that target. So what was the professional evidence that set that 5% in the first place?
Can I just clarify first of all that in that 5%, so these are the grade C reports, these are reports that are unsatisfactory, so they don't meet the standards that we have set. That doesn't mean that the recommendation isn't actually sound. There can be all sorts of things in there that actually mean that it doesn't meet the standard. So that's the first thing I think to recognise. Wherever in any system in healthcare, you will never get 100% perfection. We know that across healthcare. You've got a range of healthcare professionals, performance. You've got individuals are individuals. That's one of the challenges as well. They respond to things different ways. And it's a question of, therefore, trying to continuously improve, but to set what you think is an absolute minimum standard, and that's what was chosen here. Now, I think it was a reasonably stretching one at the time it was set. I think we've now got evidence that actually Atos are trying to improve on that, and we have had, over the past year, we've had occasions when they've been only at 3.5%, so they are actually doing better. We've taken on board Professor Harrington's recommendation, and indeed the recommendations of the National Audit Office, so they're both in agreement that we should be looking to make that more stretching. And we are in discussions with Atos about how we move to that, because what we need to do is to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is achievable and that actually doesn't drive perverse behaviour. So we want to obviously make sure that this is seen as continual quality improvement, and that we don't find that we have to, as we audit, we find that actually things that might have rendered something a grade C are being ignored in order to meet the target. Now, that's why audit's very important, and we have absolutely no evidence of that. But we want to do this in partnership with the contractor, because that is very important. So we are on the case. I think it was entirely reasonable and comparable with the sort of levels you would expect of unsatisfactory reports or performance in other aspects of healthcare, but we've demonstrated now that actually Atos are able to do better, and we are working with them to look at how we drive down that to below 5%.
Okay, nearly there. Just we took evidence earlier, and one of the dystonia was mentioned, and that was an example of many of the rarer illnesses that might come up, that even the best paid medical assessor might not necessarily have the answer every single time. And you've alluded to the fact that you're now starting to encourage people or change the system to advance notice. Are you satisfied we're now at that place whereby they will know in advance, they can then go and get that research or the evidence in advance on something they might not otherwise know in their assessment?
Sorry, you mean the individual?
Yes, the assessor. So, sorry, because as it stood before, I would be assessing someone. It would be an illness that I wasn't familiar with. Therefore, I wouldn't necessarily make the right judgment. And if I'm right, there wasn't the ability to pause the process to say you'll need to come back because I'm not satisfied. I can give an honest and true reflection of what's going on. So, first of all, is the ability to pause? And secondly, are you now satisfied that enough advance notice is given where there might be a more challenging illness to diagnose?
I think we are getting much better at it. Would I say it's absolutely perfect yet? I am absolutely sure it's not, because there will be things that we still haven't captured. But I think certainly there is a process in place now. There is a recognition that we have to capture those conditions whose impact is less predictable, perhaps fluctuating in nature. We remember it is the impact of that condition on the individual's capability for what that we're assessing, but it's clearly important that we understand the specific implications of that condition, and that's where expert input is important. As I think you're aware, as we develop our guidance for the healthcare professionals, we are involving user-led organisations, disability organisations, to help quality assure that guidance, so that we can get better at making sure that the healthcare professionals have the right advice. They can pause the process, they can send a claimant home and start the process again if they haven't got if they don't feel they've got the right information, the right understanding. But they can also make sure that we're also trying to make sure, obviously, we get better medical evidence. That's where factual medical evidence in those particular cases is very important, and that's identifying at the time that the individual submits their claim, and the ESA 50 is identifying it's a condition there where it is particularly important that we get factual medical evidence about the condition, so that when the healthcare professional does the assessment, they can actually understand fully the implications for that individual.
Because surely that would save an incredible amount of money, time and effort for everybody, in particular some people who are in a very vulnerable circumstance.
The numbers are likely to be small, but absolutely we must capture those.
And final question, where they have not met expectations, there is obviously the service credit arrangement, yet only shade over 10% of those have been applied. Now, I understand there is the flexibility in the system whereby if they are going to more than make up for it, are you satisfied that the 10.1% was a reasonable punishment?
You're smiling at me already. You can tell this isn't going.
Sounds very good.
So let me just explain what the contract provides for, and then you can decide. So the service credit regime, which is a pretty common regime in many contracts, is simply trying to identify what the essential cost to us would be of non-performance against a particular target. And we're not allowed to make it penal under contract law. It's just a number. It's basically cost to us. So we have a schedule of service credits which apply to things that damage performance. The service credits that we have not charged in the picture in this question, and actually subsequently in Harrington in the period beyond where you've got here, are all in respect of old cases, things taking too long. And the reason for that is because the contract, perfectly properly and entirely consistent with contract law, requires that we have to think about, well, whose fault was it? Is this case late because the contractor has, willfully not got enough staff, or there's some other reason, right? Now, in the case of the period you've got in the graph in the picture here, you're actually looking at a period which, in the introduction of ESA, our calculations of how long this would all take and make sure that it was done properly, we just ended up with a huge quantity of work coming along, much more than we had previously anticipated. And it was the judgment in the conversations about whether or not they had therefore fallen down on the job or whether actually we were in the wrong place, that actually these service credits we could not apply and would not have been applied in a court of law. So the test we're trying to say to ourselves is, I've got a perfectly good contract here, can I win this so I go to court of law on it? And the conclusion is no, you wouldn't win, because a court would actually say, well, hang on a minute, what was going on, what was the rationale, who did what, and that's what goes on with it. So it is a very stark answer when you end up with 10% having been applied, but it's 10% having been applied because in 90% of the cases we essentially accepted the mitigation.
So 90% was your fault?
Correct.
How much money did we lose?
How much money did you lose? Well, you lost no money.
Well, you did, because you paid out for a contract that they didn't fulfil, and therefore...
with respect, that's not what I said, is it? The contract was for them to provide services under certain assumptions about volume, okay? And when we came to this particular case, and we're talking about one metric only, there was no giving anything away on quality and not giving anything else on customer complaints, but in respect of the time it takes to do things, when a backlog occurs consequent upon a change in what we require of them, then it doesn't seem to be an unreasonable observation.
Just take me through... As I understand from the report, there were no credits September 09 to March 10 and June 11 to December 11. That's from the report. That's correct, isn't it?
The regime was suspended then, yes.
It was suspended because
there
were no credits. So why? But that's a long time after the new system was introduced 08. So especially June 11 to December 11 can't be related to June 08. As I'm sure your constituents
will know, there was still a very substantial backlog at that point.
From June 08 in June 11 to December 11 can't be right. June 08.
So I'm trying to explain what we did. Right. So what we did was looked at what was going on in this period, and in that period, in
June 11 to December 11. You just suspended.
I'm sorry. I misheard you. I thought you were talking about the first suspension. Sorry. So
there was one September 09 to March 10, which at stretching a point you could just about say is due to the introduction of the new scheme. Then there's another when you suspended it, June 11 to December 11.
Yes, okay. So June 11, as you will recall from my earlier evidence, is the point at which we introduced the change in respect of Harrington, and in April 11 is when we started to push through all the IPR values. It was not our expectation in the decision to change the request for that personalised paragraph that of itself was going to change the time of the assessment. And now, by about November 11, they got sufficiently used to knocking these things out that the time to do the assessment in November 11 was back to where it was before Harrington. In the period in between, they actually went through quite a long period when it was taking them a lot longer to do that. That's the point at which the backlog emerged, and that's why that suspension is there.
And what have you? How have you renegotiated the service contract provisions? So for credits, because it says you have in the report. How have you renegotiated those?
So there are two answers to that. At present, we're running a different system than the service credit that sits on the face of the contract, because we negotiated a so-called interim service credit regime, which is focused very directly on making sure that they are delivering as many possible exams as possible, and through a combination of looking at how we can incentivise them to be doing work in overtime or weekends and getting more out of the doctors they've already got. We're trying to get that backlog down.
So they lose money if they don't meet numbers.
The interim service credits are all around. If they fail to deliver the additional exams that we're after, then we will take cash off them.
And have you taken cash off them this calendar year?
I believe we have, and I think that's one of the numbers I've left on my desk, so I can't tell you what it is.
Well, maybe Dr. Gunnion knows. How much cash have you got?
That's not an area that I get involved in.
I brought him for the medicine.
Well, will you let us know? Have a note on
certainly.
that. Right. Did you still want to come in on a brief one, or can I go to Fiona?
Just very briefly. Yes.
Very brief.
On the issue, you did mention the medical qualifications of the Atos staff who do the reviews. Could you just clarify for the committee what those qualifications actually are? The medical assessors, what qualifications would they have?
The doctors are required to be registered with the General Medical Council, to hold a licence to practice, and to have normally at least 3 years post-registration experience. The nurses are required to be registered with the Nursing and Midwifery Council on the same basis. And they use a small number of physiotherapists as well. Again, physiotherapists are regulated by the Health Professionals Council, so they're all regulated healthcare professionals with some practice experience post qualification.
And what percentage would be doctors then?
The doctors now, in terms of percentage, I usually give you the numbers because we've now got around it's about 600 nurses. The doctors are a combination of sessional doctors and doctors actually employed by Atos, so they use both in the doctors, and the physiotherapists, a very small number. It's
how many doctors then? 600 nurses, how many doctors?
It's, now, my apologies, out of the total... I will provide that. My apologies, because I'm not going to rifle around for figures. I should have the numbers at my fingertips, but it's the combination of sessional and full-time that I'm going to get confused with, I suspect. Have you got it there?
I think we have full-time healthcare professionals.
That's the combination.
Okay.
We'll
because the concern I have is we've had the figure of about 78,000 for a GP equivalent qualified person working for Atos. I'm just wondering whether that is actually a false economy. Because if that's the case, if a doctor working for Atos is paid significantly less than somebody working for the NHS, for example, are we getting the right people into these positions?
We are very careful. Atos have a very robust recruitment process for their healthcare professionals. The only, out of all those who apply, the acceptance rate is less than, I think it's 17%, and they are then put through the training process, and the training process they all don't necessarily all come through, so they're not all approved at the end of the day, and those who, because that's partly because they are also very closely audited until they are deemed to be fully competent before they're allowed to do assessments on their own.
You will write to us with these figures, but the final question, would it be possible for you to also clarify from Atos what percentage of their doctor qualified professionals would have English as a first language?
I'm sure they'll have that information, yes.
Fiona Austin.
I'll just give you the answer to the previous question that you asked me, because I found out already with the answer of the interim service credits that we have secured from the company in the current financial year, year to date, £285,000.
Okay, thank you. Fiona Austin.
That this report is dated, and what I'd like to know is we've looked at delays in appeals, but what I'd like to know is how long does the average case take now, and how many cases now, in the most recent moment, we see from the report that a significant proportion of cases have been with Atos for more than 56 days, 25% compared with a target of 3%. What are those figures today or at the most recent possible moment?
I think I've got just like every number apart from the one that is about the older cases. I'll have to let you know that.
Good. I think it's very important that we know what today's delays are. Yeah. My experience here is that when bureaucratic systems allow, and I'm not accusing you of being unreasonably bureaucratic, but you are running here a bureaucratic system. When they allow
that can't
delays,
be evidence of the fact you just made, though, isn't it? In fact, I'm running
when
a system.
When it allows delays to build up, what starts happening is that fixes create whole new problems, and it would be really helpful for us to know the degree of delays within the system as well as the degree of delays in appeals. So I do think, is it a matter that you're at all concerned about? I'm slightly anxious that you don't know about the current delays.
You asked me a particular question about the number of dates. So, and what I've got in front of me is the percentage of cases which are older than 56 days.
And that would be helpful. Okay. What is the percentage?
Well, it varies by region in the country. So two of them, the North East and the North West, have got percentages at 1% and 2% respectively.
Yes. Well, tell me about the South East, which is where I represent, where I imagine it's rather higher.
South England is, this was, just check which month we're in here, September, just bear with me. I think, what have I got here? London Home County is 28%.
Exactly, and the target is 3% still. So there's a real problem in the south. What are you doing about it?
What am I doing about it? We have put in place, as I said earlier, two systems in negotiation with the company to get more work done by the people they have already recruited, as well as seeking to encourage them to recruit more people. If I just talk about the first bit first, so we've negotiated with them arrangements that actually ensure that there are further payments made to make sure that actually people will work out the weekend and deliver more tests than they would otherwise have done in order to eat into this backlog. The second thing is, though, I'm very keen to make sure that people think that this is a profession into which they want to go and work. And so part of the exchange I was having with the chair previously about the hearing was to make sure that we're all clear that, given the evidence I've just been presenting, working with this company, doing this test which society needs done in order to do benefits is a perfectly respectable thing to do, because in a world in which people all think that actually this is all completely chaos, actually nobody will come and work for them. And so there is very strong evidence right now that insofar as media attention elides whatever may be wrong with the system itself, with the performance of the company, it has a negative impact on the way in which recruitment operates. Now, I don't think that's in my interests or in the nation's interest for that to be the case, and so it's really quite important that we make very clear the distinctions I've been trying to make today between things which we're trying to fix in the system and whether or not that company is delivering the sort of tests which we actually invited them to do.
When do you expect in the South East you'll reach the target of 3%? I genuinely find that a hard question to see, because actually, as I've just explained to your colleague earlier on, trying to sort out even monthly forecasts looking ahead, I had previously hoped that we might be doing this by the turn of the financial year, in 3 or 4 months' time. But the numbers in the last 2 months have been significantly higher referrals than we had previously forecast. Now, if because of the reasons I've been through, trying to project exactly how many people will turn up claiming ESA
in London and the home counties in the month of November, not being a precise science. A number that we had hoped would be lower than that, and therefore they would be back on track earlier, has turned out to be higher. So I'm not going to give you a sense that I know exactly when it's going to go. It's going to depend, I'm afraid, on their ability to continue to recruit, which is absolutely the most critical thing this committee needs to focus on, because without that we won't get anywhere. And secondly, on making sure that insofar as the people that are already employed by them are actually doing the maximum possible number of exams.
Is the South East the worst on your little list, though? What's the worst?
It's London and...
What's London like?
Sorry, I quoted you the London number. London and the home counties is 28%. Sorry, too many numbers in. Yeah, the south of England is higher.
South, say again?
Is higher. It's more like 40%.
Is the highest?
Highest, yes, 40%.
40%.
Yeah. So the south of England is the bit in the southeast which isn't London.
Okay.
I haven't finished. I asked one question. I know, Mr. Devereux, that you hate anecdotes, but I really felt that I should share with you a letter that I'd had from a GP who'd written to Atos about someone in my constituency. She tells me that unless she attends a medical examination in Reading on the 16th of August, which is not very long ago, or is able to fax a letter from me to you by the 7th of August, this letter was dated the 6th of August, you would withhold her benefits. And he goes on to point out that the reason why she serially fails to turn up to appointments is because of her back pain, which means she can't walk, she doesn't see her GP, she doesn't go to the pain clinic and so on because she actually can't move, and so she doesn't go to Atos for exactly the same reason. And he suggests, I've yet to see this happening, a home visit for her. He goes on to say, you must stop frightening genuinely incapacitated patients like this, forcing the time-wasting of valuable medical resources like mine in demanding that patient produces a letter urgently at such short notice. It calls the system into disrepute and does a great disservice to a proportionate and civilised society. You should be ashamed of your ilk. I'm wondering, this is an expensive use of his time, desperately trying to get this letter out in the kind of timetable that he's been required to do. And I'm wondering whether you've looked at the additional costs which this system has put into the Department of Justice with the appeals system, or into the Department of Health with this kind of letter that the GP was objecting to me to having to send.
So should we just wind back at the process? Because one of the things that we have done, because the report identifies, the report talks about people who turn up and are then sent home, right? It doesn't in any way comment on the fact that actually we have vast numbers of people who don't attend for a scheduled appointment, right? So one of the things that we've done, and which the company does, is to seek to make telephone contact with everybody to check that they can indeed make the date, that they can actually get there. Now, I'm guessing that in this anecdote, actually that telephony contact was not made. And therefore,
no, I think it was. I think that's why she realised that she had to have a letter from her GP at this kind of notice to say, I've got to have a letter from my GP saying I can't make it, or I'm going to get no money, which is what she said to him.
No, I don't want you to think I don't like anecdote, because I spend at least as long as you do answering individual calls as well, so they're important dipsticks. The point is, I don't know the facts here, right? If it's the case that actually we have genuinely caused this person to think there was another alternative, and we've never heard of a thing called home visit, we never even tried to rearrange the arrangement, and that's the letter that's gone out, then I agree with you, that would be a bad thing to do. But I don't know what led up to that exchange and the way it's been reported by your constituent to her doctor. And so if we take it at face value, it seems to me not a good story. But I don't know what led up to it.
And my question is, have you made an assessment about the financial burden on other government departments? One of the things I often ask at this committee is when a particular department makes decisions which set costs outside its own budget. And it seems to me that there are two sets of decisions in this process where the costs rest outside your budget, Mr. Devereux. One is in the NHS, requiring this GP to write this letter. For example, I'm using it as an example. Another is in the Ministry of Justice with the number of appeals that this process has generated. And I am wondering whether you have looked specifically at the financial impact on other government departments' budgets of this process and whether you've done anything to diminish them.
Okay, I think the short answer is I personally have not looked at that. I mean, as you've observed already, the system we're running now in ESA replaced a system in incapacity benefit, replaced a system that went before then. You know, the government has been testing people's health and drawing on the health system in order to do that for decades. I have not got a fresh assessment of the burden of that, but it's not in my interest to be generating gratuitous work on the part of the GPs.
But you will know, for example, if there's an appeal, increase in appeals, that impacts on MOJ, but it also impacts on you guys.
So I'm again just trying to answer the question one at a time. So on the health service point, right, it is already the case that we invite people to say, is there any evidence you want to produce, including your GP? Right? I'm hoping he's spending rather longer supporting them make complete their form in the first place than answer the phone.
With less cost, for example, through data sharing and things like that. Because this kind of suddenly requiring GP to write a letter is very financially inefficient. There could be other ways, and there are reasons for not necessarily doing them. I accept that. But there could be other ways which are much less financially burdensome.
Would you genuinely rely on the department to sort of take data that's in the health service electronic record and make decisions on the basis of that, asking the GP?
I'm saying, have you looked at other ways? I'm not saying, I've just pointed out that there are reasons why that they might not be appropriate, for example, data sharing. But I am struck that this is financially, in terms of the taxpayers' part, this is a very expensive way of doing it.
If consistently across the country we were demanding fax letters at short notice from GPs, I agree that would be a material burden. Right? I don't know to what extent that is a common story or an anecdote, but I do agree that if it were the case that there's a piece of process here that we can improve, let's improve it. Right? I have not heard a great clamour to say actually that is indeed what's going on, and we do try to listen to what's happening.
Just to go back on the question you said that wasn't being asked, what is the cost, the extra costs of appeals to the DWP from the level of appeals in 09-10 to the level of appeals in 11-12?
I believe that we paid £26.3 million to the court service in recognition of the additional work generated by ESA and IBR review appeals.
23 million?
26.3 million, which were recorded in Note 10 of the programme costs of our accounts, and then paid, and the services are on page 132.
So the extra costs for 32?
26 million.
And that's including your costs? Sorry. Because you've got to provide professional advice.
That's the cost of HNCTS.
Pardon?
That's the money which I believe we paid to the court service in recognition
and you
of the
will have
demand.
extra costs within your own organisation.
We will have extra demand, yes, okay. But I mean, can I come back to the cost of running my department at the moment? I've got a £3 billion pay bill. We're dealing with tens and hundreds of thousands of people daily. I don't want the appeals to be at the level they're at. I'm trying to do something about it.
My understanding from figures I've seen is it's gone up more than twice, 2.5 times.
So on this point about costs, and it's not just an anecdote, it's a real life situation, just one of many I'm dealing with. Somebody who's a very vulnerable individual. Every professional involved in this individual's life, including DWP job centre staff, believe that this individual is not going to be ever capable of work. And the DWP job centre staff are spending a lot of time on a case that's been decided by the DWP. And it seems to me it's just a kind of crazy Byzantine system where the people who deal with the individual regularly and have all the professional advice in front of them have had there's been a different decision by their own department's decision making. Now, okay, you can't comment on that particular case, but it does seem
a moment ago I was being criticised for having staff who were making a decision on this, but now you're saying my staff are good enough to decide that they shouldn't be in this position. But a moment ago I was being told I couldn't have a decision.
Just a little bit, again, it's a mental health problem. It's one that's quite complex, as many mental health problems are. Now, I wonder, actually, maybe Dr. Gunning can tell us how many mental health professionals are employed by Atos, because it does seem to me that I could go on about many other issues, but the mental health issue, I come back to it again, is a a real concern. It's costing time and money for the DWP, costing time and money for many professionals involved. My mental health charities are at full stretch, as well as the various advice charities that also take longer very often to deal with someone with a mental health problem, because the anxiety this produces creates more. So it becomes this not really vicious circle of creating more anxiety for the individual, more time for all the professionals therefore involved, and it keeps going round like that. And it doesn't seem to me that this system, like many systems in government, and that's a cross-party point, it does really work for people with mental health problems. And I think, Professor Harrington may need to or this report tomorrow may well hopefully help that. But have you got any comments about those costs that are being generated, particularly on mental health?
Can I just take us back to the development of the work capability assessment in the first place? Because one of the reasons when employment support allowance was introduced was that the personal capability assessment that was used then was very poor in terms of addressing the needs of people with mental health issues and learning difficulties. And indeed, although this assessment isn't perfect and we are working at it, it is much better at identifying people with mental health conditions. Now, the world, of course, has changed. People are much more aware of issues. But the reality is that we've done a lot to try and improve the situation. The Atos healthcare professionals get quite intensive training on mental health, dealing with mental health conditions. And remember, it's not about being experts, it's about assessing the impact. However, Atos put in place mental health champions who do have mental health knowledge, who are available to all the healthcare professionals carrying out assessments. There are 60 of them. They are contactable when somebody is doing an assessment in advance of starting an assessment. They want advice while they're doing the assessment, or indeed at the conclusion of the assessment when they're formulating their recommendation. So a lot of work has been done on that side. The assessment itself, we made significant changes as a result of the internal review. Those changes when the amended WCA was introduced in April of last year to take better account of the challenges of people with mental health conditions. And as you'll be aware, Professor Harrington, in his Year 2 review, had invited the mental health charities to look at whether there were things they felt would improve the descriptors. That he recommended should then be the subject of a gold standard or evidence-based review. That is underway now, and we've been working very closely with the mental health charities. So there's a huge amount of work focused on people with mental health conditions, and in spite of the concern about appeals, for example, if you look at the published figures for quarter 4 of 2005, which is entirely in capacity benefit using the personal capability assessment, the appeals overturn rate there was 49%, which is higher than it is now for employment and support allowance.
Can Fiona finish her point?
Oh, actually, my last point was slightly different.
Okay.
And it's about a letter which I've seen from Richard Pressland saying that you intend to treble the number of ESA claimants who are referred to mandatory work programme. And I'm interested in this because of the 30% figure that you focused on a lot, Mr. Devereux, which implies to me that when a tribunal has perhaps seen someone in front of them, that on the same facts they can make a different decision to a decision maker who hasn't. And therefore a large number of these cases are people who must be close to some margin, who actually it's a narrow decision which way to make, and it's not a factual decision, and therefore they're people who might be very negatively affected by mandatory work programme if the work programme is inappropriate. I'm not suggesting that it would necessarily be, but I'm wondering what you're doing to ensure that the work programme that they're mandated to is appropriate, because if not, I think you'll see a huge leap in the number of appeals.
Appeals to?
Appeals about being put into the work capability programme rather than the other group of people in ESA. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure. Let me just check we've got the same issue then. So we spent the entire afternoon talking about the process by which we decide whether somebody's eligible for ESA in the first place, which can put you into one of two categories, as you know. And that's one conversation, and we are seeking to make that process work as well as possible to get to a good answer. But with the best will in the world, it is complex, but it must be done because somebody's going to have to do this. Having reached the best decision we have, there's another question that says work-related activity group is the group that actually we are putting them in there because we think in due course they should be capable of looking for work. And consistent with the design of the work programme in the first place, we've actually said people with a certain prospectus should actually be put into the work programme. So that's where the 30% comes from. So, I mean...
At present, we're mandating about 5,000 a month, and this letter suggests it should be 15,000 a month who are forced into the work programme.
I think we had this conversation when we were talking about the work programme to start with. When we thought about the volumes we thought we were going into the work programme, we had some numbers for sort of what you might call ordinary job seekers, and we had some other numbers for employment support allowance. To date, those numbers have in aggregate been about the same, but job seekers have been higher and employment support numbers have been lower. And there's been quite a lot of requests, including from the work providers and their subcontractors, many of them in the charity voluntary sector, to actually get more of the ESA customers. So the change in the boundary we've done here is to say, actually, well, are there other people in the ESA space who we could actually send to the work programme, because we think they could actually usefully be helped by the work programme. Now, remember, all that happens by going to the work programme is I'm giving somebody some incentive to help get you into work, right? I'm not changing your benefit, you're still entitled to ESA, still sits underneath it.
That's why I was asking whether you would be confident that what they're referred to would be appropriate. Because from earlier evidence sessions, I believe that some of the things that people have been referred to would be inappropriate for some of the groups of quite vulnerable clients who we're referring to here, who would be capable of work but nevertheless have conditions which make them vulnerable.
Okay, so at the risk of repeating earlier hearings, the way we have structured the work programme is to say we would very much like you to get as many people as possible into work, and we're prepared to pay substantially more for an ESA person, particularly an ex-IB person, to do that, because otherwise all the evidence is they would stay on benefit for a lot longer. So there are financial incentives in the system. The question you asked me last time I came is, are you absolutely sure that these providers are doing everything they possibly can for all possible people referred to them? Well, all I can say is I've set them the clearest possible indicator that society would value them getting these people into work. Right? Okay. But I am not micromanaging the provision which they actually go through.
Austin and Richard.
Dr. Bruce, you told us that it's a challenge to get some commonly agreed, universally agreed measure of whether people are capable of work or not. But it's a challenge you're failing, isn't it? Because if there's 38% of the verdicts changed on appeal, plus a proportion, we don't know how high, changed by the department when it reviews them, and a proportion who might have had a chance of reversal of the verdict had they applied and gone to appeal but don't want to do so, it's a challenge you're failing. Now, as a medical man, you can't be proud that there's such a discrepancy in the verdicts of Atos and the verdicts of the tribunal.
Can we be clear, first of all, that if we look at all the fit-for-work decisions that are made in total, of that, only 15% of those decisions are ultimately changed between those who appeal and those whose appeal are successful, of all the people who are found fit for work. Now,
only 15%.
Well, yeah, but remember what I said here. This is an incredibly difficult process, and of course, I would like to see that, and we are working to see that come down. But at the end of the day, this is something that is difficult. I think, and the challenge as well is for people to understand that, of course, it isn't this criteria for fitness for work. It's not based on somebody being 100% fit and not having any health condition. And I think that's one of the things that's often misunderstood. The assessment has been designed to try and identify those who, in spite of having some ongoing health condition, it is not unreasonable for them to work or to look for work on the basis that other people with the same condition, with the same impact, do actually work. And remember that about 26% of people who are actually in work have a long-term health condition or disability, and a significant proportion of those who are looking for work on JSA similarly have long-term health conditions, disabilities. So it is that is used as the criteria. Now, I clearly take it very seriously. You've pointed out, I am a doctor myself. I care quite passionately about what happens to people. But I also believe that what we're trying to do, difficult though it is right. Because I also have seen the evidence about the impact that long-term worklessness has on people's health and well-being. And therefore there's a real challenge here in balancing, on the one hand, putting people through in a process. And let's be clear, this is going to be an incredibly distressing process for anybody. If you or I, anybody here, suddenly face the prospect that going for an assessment tomorrow we might lose a large proportion of our income, that would be pretty difficult, pretty distressing. So it's going to be distressing. And we've got to accept that. We've got to do all the things that we can to make sure it is, we make it as comfortable a process as possible, but it's going to be difficult. But at the end of the day, for me as a healthcare professional, allowing people to needlessly fall out of work and then get trapped on benefits with all the consequences of that isn't a good option either. And that's one of the things that actually has convinced GPs, and we work very closely with general practitioners, and in order to get the sort of feedback that the member was referring to about the impact of the work capability assessment, we work very closely with GPs. But it's actually important that we can, wherever possible, help people back to work, stop people finding themselves trapped on benefits in the first place. And that's why the whole process of ESA was important, because picking up those who were coming into the system making claims in the first place and trying to get the decisions as right as possible there. It is much more difficult with IB reassessment cases, because these are people with more complex problems, but who have been away from work for a long time and for whom the barriers are much greater.
So what proportion of the 38%, that's quite an interesting point, what proportion of the 38% success rate are IB claimants who've had a reassessment or are new people on ESA?
38% success rate, sorry.
38% of tribunal cases get overturned. What you've said, it's more difficult if somebody who's come off IB and you're reassessing their capability of work from somebody who is new into the system, a new ESA claimant. What proportion of those...
Not more difficult to assess. What he said was... I
just want to know the proportion. I'm not asking you a trick question there. How many of those, are they people coming off IB? Or were on IB? How many are new?
The IB reassessment appeals data is actually, because obviously we've only been doing process...
How many...
Of the new claims appeals, there is very little difference in the success rate between those with mental health conditions and those with physical health problems.
That's a different question.
That's a different answer. I don't think that's an
different answer.
I appreciate that.
Well, I don't think we have that information.
We don't have the appeals data for IBR.
Not broken down by...
I'll tell you one thing that is...
But
I was a bit struck by, if I might just add something for a second, there's a difference in your probability of winning an appeal if you're supported by a Citizens Advice Bureau or if you're not. And it's a very marked, statistically significant difference. If we're running... If the appeals is primarily a matter of timing difference, how would that be, would you say, Doctor?
I think there are all sorts of things one could speculate upon.
Indeed.
It is, and we know this in other areas of medical practice where it is possible to help prepare individuals. It's classic, for example, in litigation, where you can help to prepare individuals to present the most compelling story about themselves. Now, if you are a body that is trying to help somebody produce the best outcome in terms of, for them, the financial outcome, then you are likely to have an impact. So it doesn't surprise me that if a Citizens Advice Bureau representative is supporting a claimant, that may increase the chance of success rate.
That's terrible, because that's
why?
Because that suggests a total lack
you.
of objectivity in the system.
No.
Go off and get yourself a bit of help from a CAB, and you're more likely to hang on to your ESA.
But that's what CAB are claiming.
No, but that's an awful,
is it not? That is what they're
way
claiming.
to run an objective. Awful. That's awful.
Okay, so let's wind back a bit then. I expected it's the case that with practice you will get a better answer, and I agree with you that it ought not to be the case. We'd like to think that it was all objective, but since I've just observed that a third of all the cases which the judges see, they reach a different conclusion on the same facts. There's a lot more judgment in this system than you or I might prefer to have.
The practitioner knows them better, had longer experience of them, and he knows more about it than a perfunctory examination on a tick box basis.
But the GPs do not want to be making benefit decisions. Ask the BMA.
I would hope I wants to help me, but he still knows the patient better.
But that is in terms of actually providing the factual evidence. The role of the healthcare professional in Atos is, as a disability analyst, is to actually assess the impact of that condition on somebody's capability for work. That's not the GP's strength, and the GPs admit that, and Mr Devereux is right, the BMA have made that very clear.
A point on that. The medical practitioner working for Atos must feel themselves under a certain pressure, whatever it is. They want to keep the job, I suppose, but they get 78,000, which is low by the general standards of the profession, but they don't want to be certified that too many people are incapable of work, because they're not going to keep the job.
Okay, well let's just nail this then, because the implication there is that we've got a contract here which is incentivising the contractors to find healthcare professionals will find a certain number of people pass. That is not the case. Full stop. These are healthcare professionals. If you want to impugn their professional ability, that's the best way to go about it, but that is not the position.
Well, you can't say that, because you don't look at the cases that have been rejected by a tribunal. There's no examination by the department of what went wrong, what was the mistake made, where was the misjudgment. Why don't you re-examine the cases?
You've just changed. Sorry, the point you made just a moment ago was that somehow there were incentives in the system that the healthcare professional would lose their job if they didn't pass. That is completely false, and I will not have it.
Okay, why don't you re-examine all these cases, or look at the cases which are rejected by a tribunal, and say what went wrong, what was the mistake?
Okay, so good news. We managed to sit down with the President of the First Tier Tribunal, Judge Martin, and agree with him that these judges...
The report says you don't.
No,
the report said it would be a good idea if we did, and guess what? We had. Hooray!
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, I'd just like
go on.
An assurance, because I am worried by this, that there is nowhere in the system, on the part of the doctors, on the part of Atos, on the part of the department, on the part of ministers, any target of the number of people or the proportion of people that have got to be got off benefit in this kind of fashion. Because ministers have been talking for some time about the number of people who've been running in the Olympics or lying abed with a stubbed toe or something, who shouldn't be on benefit, they should be out working. Is there any target in the system? No.
And can I, as a
yes,
medical professional, confirm that in terms of what we ask Atos to do, there are no targets. I can confirm that as well. The doctors, nurses, physiotherapists doing the assessment at Atos have no targets in terms of how many people they are to put in to find fit for work, to put in the workplace activity group or the support group.
And Atos don't set any targets themselves.
No.
Atos don't.
No.
There's no
You're 100% sure.
There's no incentive in the system for that.
What I can say is where the confusion has arisen around this is that because of it's important to monitor quality, as we do in other areas of healthcare, we look at where individuals are at the extremes. So somebody who's putting nobody in the support group, for example, we want to actually look and see whether that's just because the case mix they got, or is this somebody who isn't actually applying the criteria correctly. Now that is different, because that is about monitoring quality and consistency, and you do that in all areas of healthcare. GPs, it happens with their prescribing practice, for example. So that is what has caused confusion sometimes about whether there are targets or not. There is not a target. Okay. That is about trying to make sure that we've got the right quality and consistency.
Richard, and then I want to come back, and then I think we're done.
Mr. Devereux, the first thing I thought of when I heard that we were seeing Atos was the hearing we had 9 years ago in October on the basis of the report in October 2003 from the NAO, So, as well as looking at this report, I went back to look at that, and it's amazing how many of the themes are similar. That report, which was of session 2002-3, published in October 2003, said, and I quote, "The President of Appeal Tribunals reported that an appeals tribunal formed a different view of the same medical evidence in 24% of successful disability living allowance and attendance allowance appeals and 27% for incapacity benefit." So it's quite obvious that there's an enduring issue here. Could you just explain, and this might be for Dr. Gunyon, you referred to the issue of mental health, which Meg Hillier brought up earlier as well, that there were reasons other than the medical assessment itself why the tribunal might come to a different decision. And you referred to mental health in that context. Is that right? Can you just remind me? Earlier today.
I don't think I said specifically mental health. I think what I was trying to clarify was that when you are when the tribunal has somebody who in fact, the process of appeal itself is distressing and the time lag, so that by the time somebody comes in front of the tribunal, they are going to be more distressed. So even if they haven't got a mental health condition, they are going to clearly be distressed and emotional. There are all sorts of things that come into account, not in addition to the fact that, of course, the individual's condition may have progressed, because it may be that at the time the decision was made they were fit for work. 6-9 months later, that situation may have changed, and that will inevitably influence the tribunal, because I think it would be very difficult to look at someone and then try and project back how they think that person was at the time the decision was made.
You to be saying something, which I don't think they do, by the way, because I think it is a general principle of the tribunal that they're working it out in first principles, starting with the evidence today. Yeah. And so, this I'm afraid comes back to your colleague's comment about how long this process is taking. If the appeal was much more contemporaneous with the original decision, then some of this noise in the system wouldn't be there. But the reality is now there are.
Sorry to interrupt, Richard, but it also means when you do the original assessment, you ought to look at whether or not it's a progressive illness or whether it's a fluctuating illness. And one of the criticisms at the present is that you don't look at that, which is why then...
I don't think that's entirely fair.
It must be right. If you're saying one of the reasons they get overturned is that it's 6 months later, so when you look at it 6 months before, either you didn't understand it was a progressive.
Remember, we're still talking about a small proportion of the decisions we make. So the ones that end up in the appeal, the ones that end up in the appeal are likely to pick up the ones for which that is the case.
Right. But I think in terms of the fluctuating nature of conditions, we have actually, again, when we amended the WCA last year, we did things that were designed to take into account, for example, one of the challenges that we knew was where fatigue was an issue, for example, for people. But going beyond that, again, Professor Harrington got with the charities to look at the issue of fluctuating conditions, same with the mental health conditions, and actually we've combined it, and we are looking at an evidence-based review of the mental health descriptors and the things that affect fluctuating conditions. So the fluctuating nature is one aspect. The other issue is when the healthcare professional does the assessment, one of the things they give a view at the end is when it is reasonable to review the individual, and that's based on an assessment of all things being equal, the expectation of the way the individual's condition will progress, the expectation as to when it is likely that they might get back to the point again where they might be fit to look for work. So that's the prognosis bit. Now, prognosis in medicine is always difficult, and therefore people who you think are going to improve don't improve for a long time or deteriorate, and other people who you think actually are going to take a long time then improve much more quickly than expected. So there is still, I was going to say sadly, but I think it's probably an attribute, there is still an element of art in medicine. It's not all science still.
And actually a lot of that is to do with mental health, is it not? Because somebody who's very determined, come what may, to go back to work.
All of the physical health conditions have the same problem.
Of course, but there are people who are ill or have got problems who are absolutely rigidly determined that they will work. And that mental attitude presumably influences whether they end up going back to work.
Indeed. And one of the things that we have been doing, because obviously the evidence-based review around the mental health and the fluctuating conditions script is going to take some time, we have been reviewing the ESA 50 for the claimant, along with disability organisations, to try and ensure that we get much better information about the fluctuating nature of conditions right at the start of the process.
Right, well, this was my earlier question. I was really driving at what I understood you to have said, correctly or not perhaps, that there were, I thought I heard you saying that there were sometimes reasons other than the medical assessment for the appeal overturning the original decision, and you had used mental health as one of those. Did I hear that wrongly?
You noticed me, so we've spent a long time, partly in my direction, on that third of cases that are overturned because they take a different view of the same facts.
Yes.
And there's another, largely more or less 2/3, where actually what the judges are saying is actually on the basis of the oral evidence on the day, they are compelled to find in the favour of the claimant.
There is something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the question which none of us know and we can hypothesise about is, well, on that day, was the information in front of them exactly the same as the decision maker had, as in terms of the doctor had originally, or is the elapse of time and the way it's done
meaning that they were more likely to have had a bad day,
or either a bad day, or actually the information's been presented differently. Because I have a sort of simple view of life that an appeal ought to be an appeal against whether the thing that was done originally was done incorrectly. Yes. With the passage of time, we're basically going back over the judgment. Now,
yes.
Lots of judgments in life, I'm sure, could be different with the passage of time in a different audience, especially when it is not, as the chair's established, a matter of precise science.
And do you know what proportion of those 2/3 of cases involve a mental health issue?
I don't, and I don't think we
don't have that
I don't think we
information.
know. All we have at the moment is literally this minimalist set based on the data. But I mean, it's certainly, I think, high on my list of things to understand about how you take this forward.
Did I understand you to say you don't know how many doctors there are doing this?
No, we do know how many doctors there are. Sorry, I apologise for the fact that is a figure that has gone from my mind at the moment. I think there's about 1,500.
There are 1,500 medical staff,
involved in total.
1,500 healthcare professionals.
Yeah, and a small proportion of the physiotherapists, and I'm sure there's about 600 nurses, therefore. If
900
you allow me to correct it if it's wrong, it's about 900, of which a combination are employed doctors and sessional doctors. But the reason I didn't wish to mislead the committee, that's why, because I haven't put the figures to my hand, I'd rather confirm it accurately for your writing.
But is there just one more? Is there a shortage of doctors or not?
The challenge is now for it to be attractive for healthcare professionals to do this work. Atos are finding it more difficult to attract doctors and indeed other healthcare professionals. And Mr. Devereux referred to the fact that it's now getting. You can't blame healthcare professionals when they are being subjected in the media to some of the clearly unfair criticisms that there are about the job they are doing. And it is a real concern for me, because I think we need healthcare professionals to be willing to do disability benefit assessment work, and that includes work in the new PIP contracts and so on.
I have to say to you, Dr. Gunning, all the evidence we had from the health service is that there are lots of people who can't get jobs. I can't believe that they don't.
But it's not.
A whole load of people with training because the health service got their figures wrong.
But it's not because there aren't doctors or nurses around. It's that they do not wish to step into the sort of arena where they are publicly being subject to all sorts of.
Maybe they need to go on the work programme to get them into the job.
So there is because I'm not absolutely clear about the answer to my question. It's all sounded very articulate, but when you unpack it, my question was.
It's unusual, I know.
Politicians themselves, ourselves, are quite good at sounding articulate without saying anything. So I don't blame you for that. But what I'm trying to get at is, what was the answer to my question? My question was, is there a shortage of doctors?
There's not a shortage of doctors.
Is there a shortage of doctors doing this work?
It is becoming difficult.
There is a shortage of doctors doing this work.
Doctors now.
And that's exactly the same as it was in 2003. That NA report I referred to earlier said delays and backlogs existed before the department outsourced the medical assessment part of the process in 1998. Shortages of doctors since then added to the problems. But the root causes of many delays lay within the department and the then benefits agency. It sounds depressingly familiar, does it not?
So one of the I thought rather good quality bits of work that was done in the preparation for the personal dependence payment, we actually went and looked very clinically, sorry, wrong word, at the healthcare profession, forensically, at the individual professions, and actually asked questions about, what people's propensity to want to do work in this space was. Because typically, and I think this does go back a long period, including the period you're talking about there, we have been sort of employing people full time to do benefit assessment work. Right? Now, the trouble with that is you then have to find people who want to do that for a living, and in the current climate, unsurprisingly, very few people do, right? Particularly in London and the South East.
Depends how much you pay them.
Well, but where with me? Well, we then ask the question, actually, how many other healthcare professionals would like to do this for 3 hours a week as an extra shift to earn some cash or something? Actually, very large numbers are there. So one trick in making this contract go, making the PIP contract go, is to set it up on the basis that actually we get people doing this sort of labour supply with which they are comfortable, rather than saying you will do it on these terms. Now, now, be careful, because obviously at that point Bill has got a problem, because he needs to make sure that's all done at quality, because you won't have a postcode lottery.
You've never seen the same doctor twice.
But nonetheless, there is evidence that if we think laterally about the amount of hours I need to do, because this is essentially you do an hour, you can do it in that sort of way. We do believe there is a deep enough market to sustain the benefit testing, right? The critical factor is I need people to think that this is a perfectly decent calling and it's not the work of the devil, right? Now, the conversation we've had today, where I've been asked, they've got targets for making people go off benefits and all the rest of it, you can see why I'm anxious to establish some facts about the nature of the process, which I'm accountable for, which Bill has helped me support with his dollars, from the actual action which is taking on part of the contract. Because it's in all of our interest. It's all of our interest to make sure good health professionals are actually helping us manage the benefits.
Fiona, and then I'm going to... Okay, let me just tie it up. Can I just, on the mental... there are a few things that we haven't covered. One on the mental health. It's the BMA, I read a report, the BMA doctor's report, 8 out of 10 said that they'd seen patients develop mental health problems as a result of the stress of the test. Do you accept that, Dr. Gunyon?
I think I said earlier that it would be, whether people develop mental health problems or not, it is a distressing process which will cause people not insignificant anxiety, and that's clearly of concern.
Though, isn't it?
It is. But of course, one of our challenges as well is that the more people believe that this is a dreadful process that is unfair, and so the more that anxiety is increased. I think that's why it is important that we try and actually present the facts.
And it's also the way that they deal with it. Can you just tell me your nurses, how many days training do they get on mental health issues before they're let loose on claimants?
The training course that Atos give for their nurses, I think off the top of my head, is something of the order of 20 or 21 days.
How many medical professionals end up having mental health problems as a result of doing this work?
I don't have any. I don't have any figures for that. And in fact, the medical profession. We as healthcare professionals are very bad at admitting when we have problems, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if people...
and just to kill some myths, is it true that you get points for intravenous chemotherapy, but you don't get points for oral chemotherapy?
We've changed the process, and as you know, we're introducing changes in hopefully in January, to the way we deal with people with cancer, because
so just answer, is it true at the moment you get points for one and not the other in your training?
Yes.
And it is true?
Yes. Because oral chemotherapy, but hold on, when the assessment was developed, oral chemotherapy did not have the impact that intravenous chemotherapy had. Now, the world of cancer treatment changes on a monthly basis, and it has advanced rapidly. That is why we reviewed the process. Professor Harrington asked Macmillan to do it. We've then had a consultation on it. We've got regulations that we are ready to lay that will come into effect, hopefully, early next year, which actually now change the basis on which we deal with.
So they'll get points for both.
There's an implication in your question, Chair, that perfectly upstanding professional doctors deliberately come up with some gash answers to things as important as cancer. I mean, Well,
I'll tell you what there is in it. Is if you're a patient, if you're a patient and you're getting oral therapy run, as one of my friends is at the moment, as opposed to intravenous therapy, I can tell you the impact on that on her health is, and her ability
but there is,
to work
there is also an
it's not that different. And I've seen people with both.
But there is an opportunity for the healthcare professionals also, if they do actually believe that in spite of the fact that it's not, that they wouldn't be allocated points, that the impact on the individual is such that clearly they are not fit to work, they do have the opportunity to address that. So it should be picked up anyway.
And can I just ask another myth that I hope you can kill, is that the assessors aren't allowed to touch patients or carry out physical. Is that true or not?
That is definitely not true.
That is not true. Okay.
Can I just ask?
I just want two other questions at the end.
Earlier from the Citizens Advice, am I right in thinking that Atos do have the responsibilities passed on by the Department of ensuring compliance with the Disability Discrimination Act? Because Atos have to comply with the DDA.
It's the law of the land.
Yes, exactly. But our earlier witnesses suggested that they weren't confident that that was passed on to them by the DWP.
I don't think it has to be. I don't think the Disability Discrimination Act is passed on to anybody. It's the law of the land.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to ask you a cheeky question, which is, are we getting the work programme stats this week?
Are you getting the work programme stats this week? Depends what the date is. I think it's
I thought
next.
it was this week.
I think it's next week, but I can't quite recall. I have a feeling it's the 20-something, quite high, so it will be next week.
I think it's next week.
Next week.
And then it was pre-announced by the Office of National Statistics, so it's not in the gift of the accounting officer to change it.
Right. Well, we're looking forward to having you back on that. And then the very final thing.
Can't wait.
Coming with you there.
Final thing
my doctor then.
is a question on the PIP assessment contract. Because it's been, we've all been given information that suggests that what Atos submitted in their tender document was not entirely true in relation to their relationship with claimant representative groups. We've all read an article by Disability Cornwall, for example, in
have you read the tender documents?
Pardon?
Did you read the tender documents as a consequence of that article?
Well, I'm hoping you can. You can tell me because I mean I'll tell you the thing on the tender documents. It's I think people have referred to a DWP House e-News touchstone, which says the successful. This was your own document, Mr. Devereux. The successful bidders clearly understood DWP's requirements, demonstrating strong evidence of working with a range of partner organisations and including health groups and the voluntary sectors. They also demonstrated close working with disabled people's representatives groups. That's your own DWP House e-News. So it's not just the tender documents, it's your own assertion.
No, so the criticism seems to be that somebody thinks that untruths were told in the tender documents, consequent upon which somebody got a contract they shouldn't have got. That is simply false. And
the only thing I'm saying to you is that the organisations have denied any cooperation with Atos, and you yourself in your DWP News suggested it was there. They also, I'll read it to you again, DWP House e-News touchstone says...
I don't know what these words mean. So you can speak a bit slower.
They also demonstrated, I assume that's Atos, close working with disabled people's representative groups.
Yeah, so the question was, with one eye on delivering a brand new system, perfectly respectably, we were asking them, how are you going to work with the sort of people we'd like you to work with, disabled bodies, to make sure we actually get to the right answer. And so, in answer to the question, most of the bidders, Atos included, listed the many people they already have contacts with in respect to their ordinary business, and went on to explain in some detail what they propose to do by way of developing what is a new test and a new service delivered down a different supply chain than the current one.
I've just got to say to you on that, it just doesn't fit with what you yourself said in your news. They also, I'll read it again, DWP House e-News touchstone, they also demonstrated close working with disabled people's representatives groups. Demonstrated close working. And that's what all the voluntary organisations have denied.
Well, in respect of PIP.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, PIP, they haven't started doing it. This was
No,
a
but
tender document for a contract that has not been let at the point at which there are tender documents.
Because they were asked there to demonstrate that they had, not they were going, that they had close working relationships with disabled people's representative groups.
The way the story was reported when I read it, it was that actually they'd not been in touch with them about preparing to deliver PIP, and people were saying, on no circumstances would we work with Atos to do PIP. Right? Now, that is not the question which the tender document asks.
No, I'm just reading your own stuff to you.
But my own stuff is saying that they demonstrated that they work with disabled bodies. Right? So at the moment, the only way to falsify that would be to find there's no contact at any level with anybody between Atos and these people, and that's not what's been alleged.
I'll tell you what I hear what you say, so I'm not sure I'm convinced by it, but I'll tell you what it worries is whether or not that's right. What it worries me about is that in determining the new contract, whether you have a good system of checks in the procurement process in case there's anything else you missed.
Well, I suggest we have a proper hearing on how on earth a large government department runs proper procurement. But have I told you?
I mean, I hate to talk about the work programme, but that's clearly...
because of what? What procurement failing do you observe in the work programme?
Well, it just strikes me here that, however you say it just looking at your own thing, it suggested that they had a close relation. It looks at their trustworthiness. That's what it feels to me, that they were asked a question, they said something, all the disability groups have denied it, there's been articles all over the press about it, yet you give them the contract. So you think, are they a trustworthy company? And then I think, what sort of checks do you do to make sure what they tell you is right?
Maybe
due diligence, it's called, really.
Yeah, okay. So oddly enough, we do due diligence, but I've not come prepared to go through a long list about how we do the due diligence. However, we keep coming back to the same observation. The tender documents ask a specific question, right? There are references in here to disability organisations. They're not references to say we have worked closely with them on the preparation of this bid. And therein, I think, lies most of the anxiety on the part of the disability organisations. I don't think Atos has discussed this with people yet, right? And yet the claim...
Although it's been working on the ESA for... I mean, it's had a contract with the department since 2005.
I'm sorry, I'm only picking up the narrow nature in which the press story ran, all right?
No,
if you're telling me the press story was the people that said that they've never seen Atos in their life before, that will be a problem. The stories that I saw were about not having worked with Atos on their bid.
I will finally read you once more. It's not that they were going to work under the PIP. It says they also demonstrated close working with disabled people's representative groups. Obviously not under the PIP because you hadn't hadn't let the contract.
With respect, you haven't told me what says that statement isn't true. What you've told me that I'm asserting that they work with these people. I've not yet seen the evidence that you're trying to ask me to comment on.
Well, the organisations themselves.
So could you just perhaps tell me what they said? Where's the documentary evidence of what they said, so we can be really clear what it is that they're contesting? I can answer
Disability
it, can't I?
Cornwall, I haven't brought the article with me. In our case, we were horrified to hear that our name was mentioned.
As what?
By Atos on their tendering document. We were never asked by them. GMCDP, whatever that is. Yeah. It damages our brand to be associated with them.
Yes, okay. So, I mean, if I can't comment on allegations you're just reading out, right? If there's something you want me to do, then by all means drop me a line, as we did when we went through all those fraud things, which we diligently tracked down and found nothing. Do come back and show me what they are, and I'll have to respond to them. But we do not take lightly what people put in their bidding documents, and we do make sure that we've got some confidence in it, and that's the case in this contract.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.